Hello and welcome to the World Soccer Talk podcast, your weekly dose of talking about watching soccer on TV, online and apps. Coming up on episode 38, we discuss ESPN's return to the European club soccer rights business, news about new TV rights for beIN Sports, our thoughts on El Clasico, the whole experience, and exclusive interviews with Taylor Twellman and Jon Champion. My name is Christopher Harris, aka The Gaffer, and I'm joined today by Kartik Krishnaiyer. Kartik, so have you recovered yet from El Clasico Miami?
It's been a long week since that, and the combination of El Clasico Miami and then all the discussions of David Beckham and that team in MLS, and of course Miami FC and Ricardo Silva. All of this stuff has just reached like a fever pitch. South Florida soccer has never been hotter, and I've got some news that I'll be breaking in the next few days about potential return of professional soccer to Broward County. Just this little teaser. So there's just a lot going on. No, I haven't recovered, to answer your question. I'm exhausted.
All right. Well, let's start off by what we've been watching. And I haven't watched as much football this past week as normal, just because there's been so much going on in terms of covering the TV rights business, El Clasico Miami, the interviews we did with ESPN. We spent the day with them, and just life on top of that. So we'll go through these, Kartik, and feel free to chime in too for the matches that you saw. So let's go back to El Clasico Miami. This one, both you and I were at the stadium for the experience. You were there covering it, actually kind of doing a feature story on Next VR, virtual reality, and covering that for worldsoccertalk.com. So hopefully today or tomorrow we'll get that story up there in terms of that experience and what it's like to actually watch the match in VR. You and I then were also there for World Soccer Talk in terms of covering it. What were your initial thoughts about the whole experience and the game itself?
For those who knock South Florida as a soccer market, 35,200 people paid to get into training on Friday. I don't know where else in the world that happens, or where else in the United States at least. That was, to me, the most impressive takeaway from the weekend. I actually have to say that the game itself was really high level. I didn't expect that. I had been knocking this whole idea of friendlies, and just on the podcast a few weeks ago. I guess when Real Madrid plays Barcelona, they don't have friendlies. And it was an intense game for 60 minutes. Obviously, the intensity dropped after both teams made a number of changes. Although, interestingly enough, Real Madrid played Isco in the second half instead of the first, which gave them real opportunities to control the match after about the 60 or 65th minute. And Isco sprung Real Madrid into action and forced Silesen, who had played the full 90 minutes because Ter Stegen is still post Confederations Cup break, sprung Silesen into making some pretty good saves to save the result. And again, if it hadn't been Real Madrid-Barcelona, if it had been Barcelona playing even Juventus or Manchester City in this tournament, I don't know that Silesen would have exerted the effort, or I don't know that Silesen would have played the full 90, right? They might have gone with their third keeper late in the match to give that keeper some reps. I apologize, I don't know who Barcelona's third keeper is, but Valverde decided to go with Silesen the whole match because I think they wanted to win very clearly.
I was
and doing that.
I was blown away by ESPN's coverage of not just the game itself, but the whole event. Even going back to Friday night and having it was a long day on Friday. Both you and I, Kartik, as you know, were traveled down to Hollywood and down to Miami to do a series of interviews with a lot of the ESPN talent and behind the scenes staff. It was a long day. It was kind of a 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. Day, just driving around doing the interviews, and enjoyed it. But so for the actual training sessions, I ended up going home just to kind of be with my family and just kind of relax a little bit. And I switched on ESPN, and I was blown away by SportsCenter for like 2 hours, like just nonstop live coverage directly from the stadium. Of course, most of the discussion still was about Neymar, which at that point was kind of a breaking story. Is he or isn't he going to go, and what's the impact of that? And then you had the rotating cast of characters, everyone from Gab Marcotti to Taylor Twellman, Max Bretos, and then also NBA stars, NFL stars, and a lot of them I was like shocked. I mean, pleasantly shocked at how much soccer knowledge they had. You can tell that these athletes, especially NBA athletes, were really into soccer, have been watching it and know the game. And I was just stunned. I mean, I was like, this is ESPN. This is a Friday night, prime time. And in the background, you see all the training happening. What was that?
Yeah, I think I heard the number that there was something like, I think I heard a number that there was something like 40 NBA and NFL stars at the game actually on Saturday.
Wow. Yeah, and we saw a bunch of them after the game, kind of in the mix zone area. And they must have spent, 20 minutes easily with Neymar. I mean, they were just hanging out, taking pictures, talking, just chatting. And, then that would seem to be Neymar's focus.
It also gave Neymar a chance to avoid his teammates after the game because...
Right.
Everyone knows what was going on at the time, and it's now been basically confirmed.
Well, yeah, and it's still an ongoing, developing story, too, in terms of what's going on today. But the game itself, so we watched it, of course, from the stadium, from the press box. We weren't able to watch the TV experience, but quite a few times, actually, I had the laptop there with me, so I had ESPN3 running, and I was able to listen in to Jon Champion and Taylor Twellman from time to time. Oftentimes, and that's the experience in being in a stadium too, is sometimes something happens controversially. You don't have replay oftentimes in the stadium. So I would switch to the laptop to say, okay, what happened here? And the first thing that happened was Neymar's injury.
Let me throw this in right now with the ESPN FC show the next day. Both Giannis Mahalik and Paul Mariner, Steve Nickel thought that perhaps Jair Marufo incited Ivan Rakitic. There was that controversy where Rakitic bumped Marufo, the official. Both the ESPN FC analysts the next day thought that, from watching the game, that the referee had actually incited that. So that was real interesting. That was not something I thought of when we saw that. We're like, we couldn't see a replay. What's Rakitic doing? What's Suarez doing? They're in the referee's face. But
when they had the scuffle.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And that was the other thing too.
So
I mean, in many ways, if you're watching the game on television or streaming, you've got a better seat than we do in the stadium. I mean, we're watching in the stadium in real time, and there is no replays. So if I didn't have the laptop next to us to actually be able to listen in to the ESPN commentary, we would have missed a lot in the stadium. So and that's a great benefit of being at home on television, and also kind of the ESPN FC show where you have the analysts kind of looking at different situations and analyzing something more deeply. But yeah, all in all, Kartik, I think it was a really it was a great experience being there, and I was just again blown away by ESPN, and we'll get to ESPN in a little bit as far as some big news out of the soccer TV rights business. Anything else about El Clasico? Nope. Okay. All right. So, Kartik, let's move on to Major League Soccer. I understand you caught a game last weekend, and what was that experience like?
Yeah, TFC NYCFC on ESPN, and obviously not the kind of build up that ESPN had for soccer the previous day, and didn't get the kind of number that obviously the Seattle LA game was going to get right after El Clasico. But the thing that just my takeaway from this game, more than the broadcast, any of that, is that Javinko now for Toronto has become like this Messi-like figure in MLS. He's so good that you appreciate his skills, but he's so good that he's drowning out conversations about other players and other individuals in the league, and it's one of these things I actually handle for the league, the Player of the Week voting, and every week I get the ballots. And if Javinko has scored a free kick goal like he did in this game, or he's done something spectacular, you're thinking so many guys had great performances this weekend. There were a lot of high-scoring games in Major League Soccer, but so few people in the media vote for anyone else. We've all become mesmerized by Javinko, the way I think people who follow world football have been by Messi and Ronaldo for years, and it's just getting a little annoying. I mean, I love the guy. It's just getting a little annoying, to be honest with you. And maybe the other one that's in that category for MLS is David Villa. Same thing. If he does something spectacular, he's also playing in New York, so that furthers it. It's just like, Villa. But There are guys who do some really great things for Kansas City, Colorado, Salt Lake that don't get quite as appreciated.
Yeah, for Giovinco, I mean, I think to me, he's the best story that Major League Soccer has in terms of someone who's younger, someone with incredible talent, and someone that decided to move to the United States, well, to Canada, and play Major League Soccer. And it's a great story, and I think it's one of those things that it's a little bit probably of lazy journalism. I mean, it's someone they can pick that's a good model for the league, and maybe perhaps it's a little bit of that in it too. In terms of some of the other matches I watched, Kartik, I watched the last game of the International Champions Cup, pardon me, which was Roma against Juventus. Actually, it was a pretty exciting game. Derek Ray and Paul Mariner commentating on this one, and I didn't watch the whole match. It was on a Sunday afternoon, but from what I did see, I enjoyed. Also, midweek, I watched the Audi Cup. I watched the Bayern Munich against Liverpool match. And for those listeners who are probably wondering, like, hey, I didn't know that the Audi Cup was going to be on US television. A lot of these a lot of these matches, it's last minute, kind of the day before announcements in terms of that it'll be on television or it'll be on streaming. So at all times, go back to worldsoccertalk.com, and we're updating the schedules daily. And Univision did show the Audi Cup, and I saw the Bayern Munich against Liverpool match. Kartik, I was shocked at this one. I mean, of course, it's pre-season friendly. It was essentially a semi-final of the tournament, but Liverpool won it 3-0, and a thoroughly well-deserved victory for Liverpool. And Sadio Mane's back, and then plus with Philippe Coutinho and Mohamed Salah, the midfield for Liverpool looks stacked. So I made some changes to my fantasy Premier League team on this one, but they look really good.
Yeah, I think a lot of us forget that when Mane was playing consistently for Liverpool last year, they didn't lose many games. And in fact, they were sitting right around second where Spurs and City were, maybe even ahead of City before Mane got injured, pushing for second place before he got hurt, and then they had to hang on for fourth, right? The final day of the season, they had to beat Middlesbrough. But the return of Mane is huge. Salah, I think, is a big signing, even though he didn't work out at Chelsea, because he plays the kind of football that fits perfectly into Jurgen Klopp's style. This was interesting that this game was on Univision Deportes. I didn't realize it until I saw the highlights on ESPN FC on Tuesday night with the UDN in the corner. I thought, oh my goodness, I could have watched this game live and didn't realize it. So good get for Univision Deportes. In the past, the Audi Cup has been on ESPN or ESPN2 in some years. So obviously this is a tournament I think a lot of Americans are familiar with, because American Bayern fans tend to watch it, and there's always seems to be one English team and maybe one Spanish team, and AC Milan also sometimes.
Yeah, and Liverpool went on to the final, and it lost to Atleti on penalty kicks. On Wednesday night, Kartik, I know that the Major League Soccer All-Star game was on, but there was the breaking stories that we wrote about, that I wrote about in terms of the Championship, and we'll get to that in a little while too in the news section. But so I was, as the All-Star game was happening, I was running around getting quotes and writing the story to break the exclusive. So I wasn't able to watch much of that match. I did watch the last 10 minutes of it, and saw both of the goals, and 1-1 draw, went to penalty kicks. If I could sum up one word for the 10 minutes I saw, it was probably anticlimactic. It was okay. It wasn't that entertaining, but it is what it is. One thing, though, too, actually, from the All-Star game is it was the debut of the ref cam. And I think it should be renamed to the vomit cam, because, again, it's one of those things that you're seeing the perspective from the referee, but as he's moving around, it's not a fluid motion, and for the viewer, it just makes me want to throw up. So I did watch a little bit, actually. At the same time, I had the Miami FC against FC Cincinnati US Open Cup quarterfinal on, and this one was streamed live on the FC Cincinnati website. And actually, the football was good, Kartik. I really enjoyed how Miami FC play. Very sexy football, great possession, entertaining team to watch, and we're passing the ball around like not Barcelona by any means, but definitely I was really impressed by the level of skill there. But ultimately, they were outdone by a sucker punch from FC Cincinnati, who won the match 1-0, and now go on to play the New York Red Bulls in the semifinals.
Yeah, FC Cincinnati, one of the biggest stories in American soccer. Not only this U.S. Open Cup run, but drawing crowds at their stadium consistently as a USL team that are bigger than MLS crowds and are legitimately bigger. I've had that verified by multiple people who've been there. That there's always some attendance number recording embellishment that goes on with all these teams in the United States, professional soccer teams, but FC Cincinnati's is maybe less embellished than some other teams, and they've got a real incredible atmosphere there. So I'm hoping they win the whole thing. We'll see what happens. They face the New York Red Bulls in 2 weeks, and I think most people in the country are going to be rooting for FC Cincinnati that day.
Yeah, definitely, most definitely. And in breaking news, I have cut the cord, Kartik. I've been talking about this for a few months.
Can't believe it. I want to do the same thing. It's convincing my wife that we can save tons of money if we just dumped cable completely.
So that's what happened was that with AT&T, with Comcast. I've had Comcast for probably about 10 years now. And just in the last 6 months or so, especially the internet speeds have been getting worse and worse and worse. And especially in the summertime. I mean, I work from home. I mean, for me, it's a full-time job. But I'm on the internet all day long in terms of a lot of the work and research I do. But what I found was that, especially in the summertime when the kids are out of school, I'm sure they're probably streaming Netflix nonstop. But with cable, with basically a cable modem, the speed was getting worse and worse to the point where I was being like an hour without internet, which was an emergency situation for me because usually I would have to run someplace to get to connect to Wi-Fi. So I cut the cords and I moved over to AT&T Fiber, which was just installed in my area, and so far so good. I was surprised, though, Kartik, by how easy the process was. I called up Comcast Xfinity, expecting to kind of be transferred to one of the other departments and be on the phone with them for about 10 minutes, being grilled about why I was deciding to leave, etc. It was easy. I called and said, "Okay, I'm canceling." They said, "Okay, all right, thanks very much, and have a nice day." Except when I went then to take the cable box and the actual remote into the local store to drop it off, to say, "Hey, thanks, here's the equipment, here you go." I got there. The wait was an hour and a half wait just to hand in my equipment. There were so many people there. I don't know if all of them were there just to kind of cancel their cable, but I was like stunned about how many people were actually in there. And I decided just to kind of drop everything off and not get a receipt and just leave because I wasn't going to wait that long just to drop this stuff off. But so far, my wife's been impressed. We've got Sling TV, DirecTV Now, and Fubo, and as well as Netflix. And so far, I showed her how to use Sling TV, and it has the DVR built into it. We've got Cinemax, we've got Epix, we've got HBO. So she's been going through there. She knows how to find the movies, record the movies, set it on the DVR, and then watch them. And so far, I think, from what she's told me, she's actually likes this better than the cable setup. So now the season starts for the Premier League and other leagues this weekend and in the coming weeks. I have to wait and see how that impacts that experience in terms of being able to watch every game. But so far, so good, Kartik. So I don't know, maybe for your wife too, there might be hope on the horizon.
Yeah, and I've told her that we can continue to get if we get a Gravity years, we can continue to get the over-the-air channels over the air like you traditionally did 40 years ago. So the PBS, I watch a lot of PBS. She does too. We could continue to get that. As far as NBC, ABC, CBS, I mean, really for me, it's just the Premier League on NBC, and that's it. That's maybe watch the Masters on CBS when that comes around, and otherwise you can get all the cable channels via the method you described or other methods online. So it's something I want to do, quite frankly, and I think more and more people are doing it, and it's something cable systems are aware of, and I think that this segues nicely into our big news. But I know we've got to do a promo first.
One more thing, Kartik, and that's for your area. So in the past 2 weeks, YouTube TV expanded to, I think, 10 extra cities nationwide. So in my city, I live north of you, Kartik, I can't get the local channels, but your city you can. So if you check out YouTube TV, not only can you get most of the sports channels and things, but you can also get your local channels built in. So it's worth. I think they have a free trial. I think it's 7 days. So it's worth checking out too. Also, other listeners too. If you there's so many options out there. So before we get to the big news, and actually there's a ton of news this week from the soccer TV rights business, I do want to mention our sponsor, and that's SeatGeek. SeatGeek, with SeatGeek, you can buy tickets to sports and concerts, and it can be complicated, but there is a better, simpler way to buy, and that's with SeatGeek. SeatGeek is the smartest, easiest way to get tickets to live events. With SeatGeek's mobile experience, you can buy and sell tickets in just 2 taps. SeatGeek helps you find the best seats at the best prices, fully guaranteed. And there's nothing quite like seeing your favorite team or musician in person, and SeatGeek will get you closer to the action for a great value. I have the SeatGeek app on my phone, and it's by far the easiest way I've found to shop for tickets. Now, coming up in the next couple of months, there's some key World Cup qualifiers the US is playing, and throughout the United States. So there's an opportunity here for listeners to go ahead and use the SeatGeek app and to find ticket availability, also prices, etc., to see some matches in person. SeatGeek is designed to make your ticket buying experience easier than ever. It saves you time and money by searching multiple ticket sites to compare prices and find amazing deals. And to get you the most bang for your buck, SeatGeek grades every ticket based on value to help you immediately identify the best seats that fit your budget. Plus, every purchase is fully guaranteed, so you can shop for tickets on SeatGeek with confidence. Make SeatGeek your go-to app for finding the best deals on every type of ticket, from sports and concerts to comedy and theatre. And best of all, my listeners get $20 off their first SeatGeek purchase. Just download the SeatGeek app and enter promo code WSTPOD today. That's promo code WSTPOD for $20 off your first SeatGeek purchase. Now, Kartik, let's move on to the big news out of the soccer TV streaming rights business in the United States.
Yeah, so I thought it was a perfect segue a minute ago, because to talk about cord cutting, this will be great for the cord cutters if you have access to ESPN3. beIN Sports is out as the rights holder for the Championship and English Football League and League Cup matches here in the United States, and ESPN and BAMTech are in. Everything's changing. We had reported a week and a half ago about beIN apparently retaining the rights and putting the programming on their schedule. Then, Chris, quite frankly, I mean, being around ESPN people, being around beIN people during Clasico week, there began to be maybe we'll walk through how we were how you were able to report the story in a few minutes. But there began to be suspicions right away, right? A week ago, Thursday, and Friday and on into the weekend, that something was afoot. And on WorldSoccerTalk.com on Wednesday night, we reported that ESPN will be the primary rights holder, or through the sublicense from BAMTech for the Championship and Football League and EFL Cup, formerly the League Cup, this year. So that begins this weekend, starting tomorrow. Well, we're recording on Thursday, starting on Friday with a match Friday on ESPN3. You'll get 2 matches this Saturday, and you'll get a match Sunday. Full schedule for August is on WorldSoccerTalk.com on the usual page where you find the usual landing page where you see the championship matches and television. Mm-hmm. And I think this is a really exciting development, because it gets ESPN back into the European club business, Chris, and it also makes the league much more accessible. I think beIN did a tremendous job. I criticized them in year 1 of the contract for not giving it as much exposure as Fox had at times when they had the contract. But then years 2, 3, 4, I think they ended up having the contract for, was it 5 years? 5 years total. They did a bang-up job of showing games first thing in the morning if there was no La Liga conflict, showing the EFL review shows. That's one thing I'm worried about. I'm gonna throw that out there, and maybe we'll discuss this later or get answers from ESPN in the next week or two. The Football League show. beIN would show, not necessarily at the consistent time, but they'd show it. And as far as League Cup matches, they would clear their schedule for that. So even if there were Liga matches midweek or Serie A matches midweek. If there were La Liga matches, that was a whole different issue. But they did a pretty bang-up job covering the league. But now this takes the league, which has a lot of teams that are popular in the United States. Leeds United, Nottingham Forest, Aston Villa, Fulham, Derby County, etc. Sunderland has a bit of a following from all their years in the Premier League. Also, Sheffield Wednesday takes them to another level in terms of exposure in this country that they've never been at, which I think is important for the league. And this is an exciting development, but there'll be, of course, some answers that come out, and it's also interesting to look at BAMTech's strategy in acquiring these rights and the trend. And this is the big thing. This is why the cord cutter discussion is so important. The trend of moving games from television to streaming platforms, and right now it very well could change, but no streaming platform has the footprint in terms of recognition, not necessarily in terms of penetration or accessibility, but in terms of recognition as ESPN3.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's the thing there too. I mean, there's a lot to take in here. So BAMTech is actually the one who acquired the rights to the EFL Championship and EFL Cup, and then they went ahead and sub-licensed those rights to ESPN. Now, BAMTech, ESPN actually, Walt Disney Company is a part owner of BAMTech. What is BAMTech? BAMTech is a technology company. They're the ones that are responsible for the huge success that Major League Baseball has had on the digital side. So they're the ones that have created the technology and the streaming platforms and all the great technology, essentially, to make MajorLeagueBaseball.net so popular as it is, and actually really a leader in that space. But also in previous years too, actually in the past 12 months, I believe, they did the deal with HBO to go ahead and stream the kind of the back, in terms of the back end, that for like Game of Thrones and other types of things. Also, I think on the golf side, they've been in work there. So they're very much a technology company that's focused on the streaming side of things. And like I said too, their part owners or investors in BAMTech include Disney. So hence Disney being the parent company of ESPN. So there's a great in there. So so it's BAMTech that acquired it, ESPN that got it through a sub-license, and now ESPN will be carrying it to the United States. And we're expecting about 3 to 4 games a week on average. And then the EFL Cup starts up, I believe the first round is, I think, August 9th and 10th, I believe it is. But this is interesting, though, Kartik, too, because this happened, this is a story we've been chasing for a week. So on last Thursday, on the podcast, we got some internal emails from beIN Sports where they shared the schedules for the opening week of the season for the championship. And they had in there listed, they had all the games listed, the 3 to 4 that they show. Some of them were going to be on beIN Sports Connect. Some of them were going to be on beIN Sports, the television network. In subsequent days, they had additional emails that kind of updated the schedule with beIN Sports showing it. So beIN Sports, either they were extremely confident that they would renew the rights, or they had, in terms of the negotiations with the EFL, were led to believe that they were it. They were getting it. But then on Thursday, as we're driving to the interviews with John Champion and Taylor Twellman, then I was hearing reports that on the ESPN website, they started actually listing the championship schedule there for the opening weekend. So when we met with ESPN that day, kind of behind the scenes and the PR people, we had asked them, okay, I think this is going to Friday now. This is Friday. We asked them, okay, so what's the deal with going on about the championship and EFL Cup? And we got back a no comment. So on Saturday, which was the game El Clasico Miami, there we met some individuals from beIN Sports, and we were able to talk to them. They were confident that the championship deal was happening. At the same time, we talked to some of the folks at ESPN behind the scenes, and they had no idea. They were completely oblivious to what was going on and had no idea of any of these discussions. And what we found too, Kartik, is that oftentimes the talent and kind of the producers sometimes are the last people to know what's going on in terms of TV rights. They're the ones that will be told once it's done. Okay, now you need to.
One of the producers even told us that because we asked him the question, and he said, "Look, I'll be the last guy to know. I mean, when they get the rights, I'll find out what you probably from you."
Right.
So that's what happens there.
And then ESPN removed the listings from the website. So then, and at that point, still up until Monday and Tuesday. beIN Sports was still confident that they were showing it. The schedule still showed that, even on their website. There was nothing on ESPN. And then I got word, actually two things happened. When I got word, one of my sources had told me that ESPN and BAMTech were close to sealing a deal. And then thanks to one of our other writers, Ed Perovich from soccertvblog.com, he was able to get a source from within beIN Sports that said that they were losing the rights to the championship and they would not be showing it. So the two things came together, and then it was just a matter of some investigative journalism, following up with my sources, contacting the championship or EFL, contacting ESPN, contacting beIN Sports, and others within the industry to try to get more details. And then Wednesday night, as the Major League Soccer All-Star Game was happening, finishing up the story and getting an exclusive quote from a person, one of the PR people at ESPN, to share the details that, yes, they had acquired, actually BAMTech had acquired the rights and had agreed a deal with ESPN for ESPN to cover the Championship and EFL Cup. So big news. I mean, it took a week of chasing to get the story, but and then today, Thursday, August 3rd, EFL has announced officially that BAMTech and ESPN have the rights. So we were able to get the news out. And that was, I was pushing really hard too, because I was saying, okay, the season starts on Friday, August 4th. Here we are, August 2nd, the night of. I really need to get the story out there to let people know so that they have time to adjust their TV streaming plans to make sure they don't miss any of the championship games. Added to this whole complexity too is iFollow from the EFL, which is their new streaming product. So we've gone, I won't go into any more detail, but on the website it does have the FAQ about iFollow, what it is and how it works. And also on the Championship TV page too, TV schedule page, we've got all the listings, as Kartik said, all the way through to the end of August. And it shows which games are on iFollow and which games are on ESPN3. And all in all, it's great news for soccer fans in the United States. So Kartik,
I should note that there are clubs that are not participating in iFollow, like I think Aston Villa is one of them.
Yep, Leeds.
Leeds is another. Big clubs that have big followings in this country. So just note that.
Yeah, it's quite a few actually. There's I think Wolves, Middlesbrough, Sunderland. Actually, it's quite a few. So which is a shame. So hopefully they'll get their act together, or they'll issue their own streaming product. Yeah, so iFollow and ESPN3 is the way to go. ESPN3, for those cord cutters, you can get ESPN3 through Sling Orange, and it's completely integrated into the app itself, so you don't have to go separately to the Watch ESPN or ESPN3.com. You can just actually watch it from within your Sling app. The winners and losers on this one, Kartik. The losers, I think, beIN Sports. I mean, this is not a massive hit in terms of viewing numbers, but it is a very European-centric, very English-centric part of the audience. They're probably going to say, like, well, do I need beIN Sports now? If you've lost the League Cup and you've lost the Championship, and yes, you have La Liga, and yes, you have Serie A and other games, but from beIN Sports' perspective, this is a big hit, and I've been hearing kind of quite a few different sources as far as budget cuts at beIN Sports. This is kind of some worrying times in terms of them losing this one out to BAMTech.
Yeah, no question about that. I think they lose a segment of their audience that keep beIN because they had maybe more than championship rights, League Cup rights, and they also potentially open the door for the floodgates with other leagues leaving and potentially finding new television partners or new streaming partners in the United States. And that's it's been a struggle for beIN to get on cable systems, and they have to kind of claw their way to the point they're at. But they're still only on in 28 million homes, something like that. And it's just not enough market penetration as these leagues look to grow their footprint in the United States. So It may take a while, but I think that they're probably not the last league or competition to leave beIN, unfortunately for beIN.
Yeah, and one of the winners in this one would be BAMTech. I mean, this is their first foray into the soccer TV rights business, and with the technology experience that they have, and especially the streaming experience that they have, this could be something in the next 12 months, Kartik. They could try to gobble up some other rights. We know that they tried to get the UEFA Champions League's rights, but Turner Sports got that. The FA Cup rights are still out there, and there's probably a few other ones too that they could get. They could conceivably have a strategy for next season, 2018-19, where they have a over-the-top soccer streaming package that would have the Championship, that would have EFL Cup, that could have, say, the FA Cup perhaps, or other leagues from around the world, where it is an all-in-one, almost like a Netflix type of situation to subscribe to watch all this soccer, if they want to do that strategy, or if they want to work in conjunction with ESPN and have ESPN be the one that's basically sub-licensing the rights from BAMTech. But it gives them some good experience in the soccer industry, kind of to get a better understanding of how we think differently than other sports and other sports fans in the US. But definitely a win for them, and it'll be interesting to see how it all comes off.
Yeah, and just to remind people, I think BAMTech is of course essentially a joint venture between Major League Baseball's Advanced Media Division and Walt Disney
and the NHL
and the NHL. Yeah. I forgot about the NHL, right? And they handle the streaming for the NHL, for the WWE, for Major League Baseball, HBO, and now in the United States for the Football League.
Definitely. So if you have any additional questions about this whole news, definitely check us out at worldsoccertalk.com and let us know, and we'll get back to you there. In other news, Kartik, this is some interesting news that kind of flew under the radar, but Dish has sued over Univision's decision to broadcast Liga MX games in English on Facebook. Now, this is something that when it happened back in, the end of last season, some eyebrows were raised. And in terms of this, like, how is this even possible that Univision is able to actually broadcast these games for free, stream these games, when you have other companies that are the Sling TVs of the world, the Fubos of the world, PlayStation View, et cetera, are spending a lot of money to be able to show these games in Spanish. Well, so there's a disagreement between Dish and Univision over the contracts and what Univision can and cannot do, but it could raise some alarm bells among other broadcasters and other leagues that are looking to stream games to Facebook Live for free. So it could be an impact there, or it could be one of those things that they work out a deal, but still interesting that Dish Network, which is the owner of Sling TV, has sued Univision over the Liga MX Facebook streaming. Now, Kartik, on to other news in the world of soccer.
The second division in Mexico, Liga Ascenso, will begin working with MP and Silva and Barral to maximize the full potential of the league in the American market. And we've seen at times these games, when they pop up on American television, can get decent ratings, particularly if there's a popular team that is relegated to the second division. The Coxa was in the second division for a couple of years. It's clubs like that, Leon, second division for a couple of years. They can get a decent number on American television. There is a great opportunity for the league to grow in the U.S., given the size of the Mexican-American demographic and just the interest even among American soccer fans in Mexican football. The media rights package will include all home matches played by the club starting at the new season, which began this month or last month, July 2017, and it runs through the close of the 2021 season. So that's the Clausura in 2020-21. So essentially a 4-year deal.
This is a big deal, Kartik. I think we mentioned it on last week's pod, but probably about 3 or 4 years ago, Don Garbo was quoted about saying that there's too much soccer on television, which at the time we laughed at because we said that that's crazy. I mean, like, if there's enough demand out there, then I mean, the more soccer, the better. But as with ESPN3 getting the rights to the championship, making the championship more accessible than it has been for many, many years, and now with this, with Ascenso, the second division Mexican league, with MP and Silva working hard on the commercial side, but also on the media side in terms of trying to sign some deals to get the second division Mexican league on the US airwaves, whether it's television and or streaming. This could be a big deal. And we know that Liga MX is the most watched soccer league in the United States by far. And we know also in terms of, I think it was Dorados, but the TV numbers from the Ascenso from the last time there was the playoffs, those were high. Those were, I think there were, 200, 300, 400,000 people that watched those games on Univision. So there's definitely an interest level there. It's been untapped, and I think for MP and Silva to move in on this one, to try to give that league, that second division, more accessibility, could be a big hit for Mexican soccer fans, but also could be a big blow for Major League Soccer, as in here's another league on top of everything else where it's going to be very accessible to watch and probably pretty entertaining. And again, another second division, just as in the Championship is a second division league. Now, Kartik, moving on, NBC Sports. This is a big deal too for fans of the Premier League. For the first time ever, is going to, for the opening weekend of the season, which starts on Friday, August 11th, they will be in England. So the whole entire crew, Rebecca Lowe's going, the two Robbies, and Ola White's already there, of course. And, of course, how could we forget Carlo Martino? So all of them are going to be there. Lee Dixon and Graham Lasso are going to do the pitch sides and studio analysis. And we're going to have a Ola White triple attack of commentaries on the Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. And then the Friday game, I think, is the Carlo Martino. The Saturday game is Robbie Earle with Ola White, and then the Sunday game is Robbie Mustoe. And it's Arsenal-Leicester, Brighton-Man City, and West Ham against Manchester United. So you get those three matches, and of course you're going to get about 21 hours of coverage from the entire weekend, from having the crew there based in England and having it be the opening weekend of the season. I think it's going to be just as, I mean, to me, Kartik, this is always one of those things we always look forward to the most out of the entire season. And to me, there's just enough reason. I mean, there's so many reasons to watch this type of coverage, to see where they're at, what type of interviews you can do with the pitch side, on pitch side with some of the players and managers. I'm really looking forward to this. How about you?
Yeah, I am as well. I mean, I'm really surprised NBC starting the season with this trip to England. Obviously, it's a little bit different than what we've seen in past years, where they've gone in April. They've had a couple of weeks to build it up. You're in the flow of the season, although in some cases you're hitting kind of that lull in the season where things are becoming kind of monotonous, and it provides a nice break from the Stamford studio and the crew interacting. Starting the season this way is a little bit different, but hey, I think it'll be good. I think we'll enjoy it as viewers. I just wonder from NBC's experience and from their commentators' experience if they prefer starting the season over there. And let's speak specifically of the studio team of the two Robbies and Kyle Martino. If they prefer starting the season there on location, or whether they would rather start the season in the Stamford studio, and even if they make a trip early in the season, maybe go after that first international break, when play resumes in September, something like that. So you kind of build into a flow for the season before you make that trip. So from a television perspective, I'm curious about it, and from a talent perspective, from a fan perspective, I'm sure we'll enjoy it.
From a TV perspective, I think it's one of those things they want to make a big push at the beginning of the season, especially with there being more and more competition on the TV airwaves from the soccer side of stuff, and also with the concern that the ratings did drop last season. So here's a big push at the beginning of the season, and they're probably thinking, okay, maybe if we give an extra push now, maybe that'll help us throughout the rest of the year. And also, too, I mean, with the Gold Cup this past summer and the International Champions Cup, too, there's probably a lot of soccer fans or actually sports fans that are now starting to get into soccer And I think for NBC Sports to come in really hard opening week and just try to win these fans over, this is a good tactic to try to get them to be watching NBC Sports throughout the entire season. Now, Kartik, on to other news.
Yeah, so the Bayern Munich Borussia Dortmund German Super Cup will be featured on Fox over-the-air network. That's very exciting news for people who probably live outside the Miami-Fort Lauderdale market, where I'm assuming it won't be on WSVN, but we'll check on that as the time nears. But exciting news that they're showing this matchup. This is the one matchup in German football that seems to be able to drive television numbers and drive interest to levels that the other European leagues have. So should be good, and looking forward to it.
And in the opening of the show, I kind of teased that beIN Sports have got some TV rights news, and we can reveal exclusively on this podcast. I haven't written it for the website yet. I will do later today. Is that beIN Sports is picking up the Turkish Super League, and they're going to have one match per round from the league. And some exciting news there for the fans of the Turkish league. And thanks to Ed Perovic from soccertvblog.com for the insight on this one. But we'll be writing about it in more detail today.
That's fantastic news, and the Turkish league starts this weekend, of course, along with a few other leagues. Liga, of course, another beIN property starting this weekend.
Yeah, so on the European soccer TV side, like you said, Kartik, this weekend, big weekend in Europe. So the Portuguese Primeira Liga, this one, of course, this one has moved. So for those fans of Portuguese soccer who are accustomed to seeing most of those matches, if not all the matches, actually, on Fubo TV last year, it's changed. So this season it's on Goal TV, and the TV schedule for this weekend, so on Sunday there's 2 matches. Only one of those matches is going to be televised. So that match will be on Goal TV with Sporting Portugal playing. It'll be on Goal TV. Fubo does have Goal TV, so it's one of the few places you can get Goal TV. So they'll have that match. Fubo also has all of the home Benfica matches through Benfica TV. So again, you can watch those there. As for next week's schedule, because actually there's a bunch of matches in the Portuguese League on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Goal TV has not announced the schedule yet. So if you are a fan of Portuguese soccer, it's going to be a difficult season because Goal TV is often doesn't announce the TV schedule until just days before the matches happen. And so as a result, we're not going to know until sometimes 24, 48 hours, sometimes 72 hours if we're lucky, which games are going to be shown on Goal TV and also Fubo TV. So you're going to have a lot of patience, but it looks like less games will be shown overall compared to last season, but it still will be televised. Liga MX, most of those matches for the first couple of weeks of the season will be on beIN Sports and Espanol. But once the other seasons start kicking off, the majority of those will be on beIN Sports Connect. Scottish Premiership, last but not least, that one, as of this recording, it's still not on television. And if you do want to watch Scottish games, your best bet is to go ahead and subscribe to the streaming packages directly from each individual club. So Celtic TV, Rangers TV, etc. But we're waiting for developments on that to see if Fox does pick up any of those games on television. So far for the opening weekend, they have 0. But that could change.
Okay, so the latest numbers are in from different cable channels and how many households are in. The biggest winner this month, specifically when we're talking about channels that cover soccer, was FS2, which is great news because fewer and fewer people will be complaining about not having FS2 when a Champions League game is on there, or presumably a big international is on there. It's up to 52 million households. Biggest loser this month was ESPN2, which lost 2.5 million households. They're now down to 66 million homes in the U.S., which is getting into kind of dangerously low territory, honestly, for a channel like ESPN2, where ESPN broadcasts much of its soccer.
And actually, Kartik, I think that was actually a typo on my part. I apologize, listeners, but actually it's ESPNU. I'm sorry. ESPNU is the one that lost the 2.5 million households, and they're now down to 66 million.
Now they share a fair amount of soccer as well.
They do very much so. All right, so let's move on to TV ratings. We're not going to go through everything. We will have the entire list at worldsoccertalk.com for the past week, all the games that we could get access to in terms of the TV numbers. The big one to lead us off, Kartik, was 1.7 million for El Clasico Miami. This was on ESPN in English, and then ESPN2 in Spanish, and ESPN Deportes in Spanish. And it was pretty much the same number, it was 1.7 million, as the USA-Jamaica Gold Cup final on FS1. So before the match, I think, Kartik, you and I kind of tried to predict what the viewership would be for this one. I said it has to be over 1. I said ideally it'd be 2, but it came in at 1.7, which is pretty darn good for a match that there was a lot of people were hating on, saying this doesn't mean anything, this is meaningless, why this is a waste of time. But 1.7 million is pretty decent.
And that's interesting, the 1.7 million for that, and obviously the Gold Cup final, because I think it's showing that there's now, and maybe it was just fortunate because it was in the same week or back-to-back weeks, that there was really same week, Wednesday to Saturday, a consistent audience for summer soccer games at a high level, or which are perceived to be important matches. So that's a good sign for the sport, because there was concern, at least in these quarters, in my mind, about the drop in Premier League numbers last season, and was that going to be a harbinger for kind of a drop across the board for European football and international football, and with the Gold Cup and with Confederations Cup, Gold Cup, and now El Clasico Miami and ICC, we see that that's really not the case.
Other numbers, so the U.S. women's national team, the Tournament of Champions game against Brazil, which was on ESPN2 on last Sunday, that had 643,000 viewers, a good number there. The Atlanta-Orlando game, which was on the Big Fox, the over-the-air Fox network on Saturday, had 478,000 people. LA Galaxy against Seattle on ESPN was on Saturday, and that was 397,000 viewers. And then AS Roma against Juventus, that last ICC game on ESPN on Sunday, that one had 326,000 viewers. So, Kartik, let's move on to listener mailbag. First one is from Uday, and he posted this on worldsoccertalk.com. And as we go through it, Kartik, we might stop in different parts of the letter to answer him specifically. It says, "Hello, Christopher and Kartik. Great job in creating your podcast. I am a regular listener to your podcast, along with MLS, ETR, and Soccer Nation. All three are fun to listen to. With regards to your most recent podcast on summer friendlies, MLS and ProRel, I value your opinions, but I have some friendly disagreements. Number one, I think MLS has done a decent job in trying to make USA a top soccer country. The business model they have chosen is a direct consequence of the past bankruptcy of NASL. In the 1980s, NASL was the top league, but they completely misread the soccer market, overcommitted financially, and went belly up. What revived the top soccer league in USA is the 1994 World Cup, and USA winning the Women's World Cup in the United States. This created organic interest in professional soccer in America. When MLS was created, they made a brilliant move by going through a conservative business model with tremendous parity in the league. I must say, no other soccer league in the world has the same parity as MLS. This is great for all the teams because the games are competitive and entertaining. The current MLS business model will be successful until they reach their full capacity of 28 teams, or maybe 32 teams like the NFL. So we just need to be patient until that point is reached. After that point, we do need to introduce ProRel to take it to the next level, but we have to compensate the teams that go late into MLS and put $150 million a franchise fee and then pay that. Number two, ProRel should be tried out at Division 2, 3, and 4. Let's see how that works and learn from it under American conditions. I think there is already some effort going on this front. I fully support this. 3, friendlies. I live in the Bay Area and have watched the Earthquakes, the USA in the Copa America and the Gold Cup, and a friendly. The crowd that you get in the summer games are not MLS. They can be very deceiving. In the summer here there's no competition from college sports, NFL, NBA, and NHL. The friendlies attract die-hard foreign club soccer fans, and some fans like me who are very curious to see the top league teams play. But crowd size that you see at the University of Michigan is not a true gauge for a sustainable local club. The crowds that you see at Atlanta United and Sounders FC are true indicators because this is organic local interest. These are people born in America, many young people who are interested in Made in America. People like you are elite soccer watchers, and you can distinguish the nuances of Barcelona's level of play versus the Galaxy. But for people like me, I want to watch a competitive soccer match that is entertaining. So the interest that we are seeing in the friendlies is a false indicator. Those are one-time events per year, and that is why people are willing to pay higher ticket values. Ask the same people to pay the same amount for 20 games a year, and I doubt we will be able to fill NFL stadiums. We have to be patient for the game to grow organically. Cheers, Uday from San Francisco Bay Area.
Yeah, I agree with a lot of he said. First of all, I mean, this is my issue with people who bag on MLS. I critique MLS, but I watch it. There are people who tell me, and openly fighting with me on Twitter even yesterday, that it's if you care, if you're into reform, if you're into open systems and promotion and relegation, you shouldn't be watching MLS. You're enabling the enemy. They're like Hitler and Stalin rolled into one. Look, I just want to enjoy soccer. I'm a soccer fan. I get the ideology. I support open systems. I don't like the way MLS is structured. I understand why they structured that way after the failure of the NASL. But we're 20 years on in the business. We're 20 years on in soccer sophistication in this country and understanding the sport to where we want the league to change its structure. But that doesn't mean I should deprive myself of watching Major League Soccer and supporting a local Major League Soccer team and boycott everything they do. They're doing a much better job of developing players now with the investment they put in development academies. That's something the NASL, which is the standard bearer for a lot of these malcontents, it has no interest in doing. They have no interest in developing players. Our former colleague on this podcast, Nipun Chopra, revealed the statistic that the NASL is actually the oldest league in the world in terms of average player age, because they just sign journeyman players, and then their fans jump up and down about not being treated fairly, but they're not really investing in growing the American game because they're not investing in young players and player development. So a lot I agree with here, but the thing I would push back on what Uday is saying is that I think we're more sophisticated in this country than we were 20 years ago because we have exposure, as we talked about earlier on this podcast, to all these leagues around the world and the internet age and books about soccer and reading about soccer online and reading publications like Jonathan Wilson's The Blizzard. We know how the sport is structured abroad. We know how the sport works abroad. So MLS has to acknowledge that, and if they're going to grow the sport to the stage where it can potentially grow to in this country, they're going to have to open up. But I agree with him. I don't want to come across like I don't appreciate what MLS has done for for the game in this country, because I do, and that's a big part of my issue with the people who are big Ricardo Silva fans and big NASL fans, that they have no appreciation for the tens of millions, hundreds of millions of dollars MLS has spent on growing the game in this country and on trying to develop players and keeping a viable top-flight professional league in this country, which we had proven we couldn't do in the past. A stable top-flight professional league. So, yeah, a lot I agree with actually in his comments.
Santos also posted a comment on worldsoccertalk.com, and he says, I try to remain calm when I listen to you guys because you guys care about the media landscape of the sport. But sometimes you guys are not as informed or have tendencies to offend many groups of people. Patriotic comments about Fox commentary, it's for American men or American women's team fans. The same kind of commentary can be found on Argentinian TV or Peruvian TV, if you guys know Spanish, and or also the same for England or Wales TV crews. There's always at least one patriotic network for any country's teams. While I might not like Fox, I get why they do it, so let's relax or turn down the Fox bewilderment for a bit. And let me just step in on that one, Kartik, too. I definitely realize that, I've watched England matches from England. I've watched Wales matches from Wales, and other countries kind of. But I just think Fox goes over the top, takes it too far, to such a point where there's hardly any analysis or coverage or focus on the other team.
That was going to be my point, is that I think that they do it a little worse than they. And I agree actually with Santos about some of the crews in Latin American countries. Mm-hmm. But Fox takes it to the point where they don't respect the opposition, unless it's CONCACAF opposition, and sometimes they have to build them up, and they have no context for who. And this is a critique I'm going to make of Fox, because they've done a couple games recently. They have no context of who the Honduran team might be missing when they're playing the United States. And what the transition might be like in Honduran football the last 3 years, and what Pinto was facing managing that team when they broadcast that game. Same thing with Jamaica in the Gold Cup. Same thing with opposition in the Gold Cup. So I think it's one of these things where Fox, even in our own region in CONCACAF, they're not paying that close to attention to the guys who play for teams that the U.S. is facing, who are not, and this is important, who are not based in Major League Soccer. I just don't think that they make the effort. Now, at times, ESPN hasn't been a shining light either. I mean, I remember, speaking of Honduras, in 2009, the U.S.-Honduras game in Chicago, on ESPN, which I believe was JP Dellacamera and John Harkes. And Harkes just kind of glossing over the fact that Honduras was missing 4 or 5 starters, and prominent guys like David Suazo. So maybe we pick on Fox more than we should, because ESPN has made some of these same mistakes in the past. But we're seeing it now from Fox, is the point.
And Santos continues, he says, as for the ICC over Gold Cup competition comment, very insulting, to be honest. While, yes, there are squads that are B or C or D, they push themselves. You saw the Jamaican players at the end of the game on the floor, in defeat, almost in tears. You know they wanted it. So to say that these kind of comments is truly insulting. We get, though, that the Gold Cup may not be your taste, but there are others who care about these kind of tournaments. I'll keep listening to you guys, but work on your coverage and comments.
Let me answer that. It actually is my taste. I used to watch the Gold Cup as religiously as I watched the World Cup, because it was something the U.S. could actually win. 2003 Gold Cup, 2002 Gold Cup, which was in the winter, the last Gold Cup in the wintertime, I watched more closely than I watched the 2002 World Cup. 2005 Gold Cup, I watched as closely as I watched the 2006 World Cup. 2007 Gold Cup, coming off the disastrous 2006 World Cup, I can still remember my excitement for the first game. I flew out to Los Angeles for the second U.S. game against TNT, but the first U.S. game against Guatemala, Max Brado's voice coming on Fox Soccer Channel, like, we're back in a major competition after the flame out the previous summer. I used to take the Gold Cup very seriously, but what's happened to the Gold Cup recently is that the Gold Cup in the World Cup qualifying years, so 2009, 2013, and 2017 have become a joke. 2007, 2011, 2015 absent the Matt Geiger officiated game against Panama, have been good tournaments to watch, important tournaments with 8 teams. CONCACAF is into making money for small Caribbean islands. They're into CONCACAF things. So we keep getting the 9, 13s to 17s. We'll have a tournament in 21, for no doubt. I sympathize with you, Santos, because in 7, 11, and 15, I took the World Gold Cup very seriously. 15, it was a good tournament. 17, it was awful. 11, it was a great tournament with a great final at the Rose Bowl in Pasadena. 13, it was a joke. And I know Americans don't want to hear that because the U.S. won on Brett Shea's kind of fluke goal against Panama, but it was a joke. In 2013, Mexico, the best country in this confederation historically, even though they were going through a tough struggle at that time, they sent a team whose most capped player had 11 caps, Rafael Marquez Lugo. It's not a serious tournament in World Cup qualifying years, because you have the majority of countries that are serious contenders to win the Gold Cup. Jamaica's an exception this time because they didn't make it to the Hex because they were in a tough group with Costa Rica and Panama. But the majority of countries who are serious contenders to win the Gold Cup sending B or C teams because they're in the middle of World Cup qualifying. That's my issue. And I'm sorry, Santos, that I didn't articulate that more forcefully on earlier shows. But the Gold Cup is a joke in World Cup qualifying years. I will stand by that. I will look forward to the tournament in 2019, and will probably make the similarly, quote, insulting comments in 2021, because there's no need for there's no confederation other than a couple of African nations, and that should be revisited also, continue to do this every 2-year thing. And as far as the Cup of African Nations, I think it's a conversation for another day, but I feel similarly about them having competitions every 2 years. But they do it for the same reason, so that they can replenish the coffers for poor African football federations. And I get that, but competitively, I don't like it.
And it's one of those things, Kartik, in previous years, the Confederations Cup was always the joke. That was the tournament that everyone kind of said, this is a joke of the tournament. Why even have this? But this year, I mean, Confederations Cup to me was more exciting than the Gold Cup, which says a lot. But going back to Santos's comment about the B, C, or D players, it's not that they weren't trying, and definitely the determination was there. These are players that definitely gave it their all. So from that point of view, I completely agree. We weren't inferring that it was a joke because of the way these teams played.
I think part of the issue is, and Santos might be able to appreciate this, is that the U.S. U.S. fans and Fox, and we just talked about Fox with him, they have a tendency to look down on other CONCACAF nations. And so part of my problem is I had to point out to everybody, here's Jamaica's regular team. Here's the team they beat us with in 2015. How many guys from that team are on this team? No, it's an A team because they're not. No, it's a Jamaican B or C team. Mm-hmm. Calm down. The U.S. B team is not beating a Jamaican A team. Okay, and I guess maybe that's where maybe I go over the top with my critiques of the Gold Cup, because U.S. fans aren't willing to acknowledge Panama didn't really send an A team to this tournament. They had some A team players. Yeah. Costa Rica cycled out whatever really high end A team players they had that are playing at big European clubs, Campbell, Oviedo, et cetera, cycled out after the group stage. So that's part of my issue with it, is that American fans and American writers and American analysts, because they want to build up the U.S. men's national team and all their accomplishments, and they get into this faux nationalism thing every time there's a major tournament. And even though I support the U.S., I'm mostly saying that I took Gold Cups as seriously as I took World Cups once upon a time. They tend to be the ones who slag off those other CONCACAF teams and basically say, they're playing an A team and they're not very good. Well, no, they're not playing an A team. Mm-hmm. And Jamaica, that team was nothing like a team for Jamaica, and Theodore Whitmore did a fantastic job. And if Andre Blake hadn't gotten hurt, they might have beaten the U.S., and that probably would have been justified, honestly.
All right. So if you guys have any comments or questions or disagreements or something you agree with us on, let us know through the different channels, which should be email is web@worldsoccertalk.com. Twitter is WSoccerTalk. And then Facebook is facebook.com/worldsoccertalk. And we'll do our best to read out those comments and questions and feedback on air on the next episode. Now, Kartik, moving on to our featured topic of the week, we're going to do things a little bit differently this time. We're going to play our interviews that we did with Jon Champion and Taylor Twellman that we conducted with ESPN late last week, right before, actually the day before El Clasico Miami. But the topics they discuss, we purposely didn't focus that much on El Clasico Miami because we wanted these interviews to stand the test of time. And with Jon Champion, we went one way. Taylor Twellman, we went another way. But what are some of your thoughts or some of the things that you're looking forward to listening on this pod for other listeners to tune into, or some interesting observations?
Yeah, I think just talking to Jon Champion about his background in commentating and how he got into it, and radio and moving from radio to TV, the kind of circumstances under which he started his radio career. I think that's going to be fascinating for everyone to listen to. Also, the impact of John Motson on his career. What's his regular weekly routine when he calls matches? What are some of his great memories in calling matches in England, in the Champions League, here in the U.S. now, the last few years, et cetera. I think that'll be enjoyable. Now, as far as Taylor Twellman's concerned, there's a lot there. There's a lot to talk about, as there always is with Taylor Twellman, the preeminent voice in my mind in American soccer. So you can chew on things with Taylor Twellman. We finish up, I think this will be interesting to a lot of people. We finish up talking about head injuries, because obviously that's a subject near and dear to his heart, and how he answered my question on that was fascinating. I did not realize the extent to which, and I'm kind of heartened by it, although we want to see action taken, that some authorities in Europe are serious about dealing with the situation with head injuries. Of course, the flip side is UEFA and FIFA aren't terribly serious about it, and that's something all of us out there need to band together and push for. I think all too often we wait for a head injury in a match, someone to suffer a concussion, an incident like Hugo Lloris at Spurs a few years ago when AVB was managing them and put them back in the game. We wait for that to talk about this issue. This issue should be talked about 365 days a year until FIFA gets some common sense and puts player safety first.
For me, for Taylor Twellman, the interview, his answer to the question about what impact or what can MLS gain from ICC was an interesting part of the conversation where that really threw him off, and he went through some good reasoning and circled back. Was at a loss at first, but I think came back with some pretty some strong statements in terms of what MLS can gain from ICC in terms of all of these teams being here. With Jon Champion, it was illuminating how much time ahead of time they know which games they're going to be covering. So he shares some great insights in terms of that, in terms of his schedule and how far in advance he knows which matches he'll be doing. But at the end of the day, I think Jon Champion, what an incredible gentleman, Kartik, giving us so much of his time on a hot, balmy day. The audio quality isn't the greatest, so the Jon Champion parts you can hear really well. Kartik and I are a little bit more soft-spoken, but what it was is we were outdoors in the shade, next to, not too far from a swimming pool and the beach. So we're right beachside in Hollywood, Florida. So there's a little bit of background noise, but be patient. Jon speaks up very loudly and eloquently. So definitely perfect to hear there. And the Twellman interview was conducted indoors, so the audio environment was a little bit better, but still both of them true leaders in their different areas, and it was a pleasure to speak to both of them, and it's going to be a pleasure to share these interviews with you, the listeners. All right, so we're here with Taylor Twellman. Taylor, the first question I want to ask you is that in many ways, Kartik and I think, agree on this. We see you as very much a modern co-commentator and analyst, so somebody who's very opinionated, but also very active on social media, has great contacts, great network, is oftentimes breaking stories on social media, and in terms of the way you kind of analyze games too, just a very modern, fresh perspective. How do you...
It's a good question.
For El Clasico for this weekend, I mean, in terms of preparation, in terms of the way you think about this game, what goes into this?
Preparing for the ICC games is like preparing for... I compare it to when you're in college or even high school. The first day of class, you have to prepare for the final exam that's the next day. I literally just looked at my labels. I have 61 player labels ready for the game.
Wow.
Because of substitutions. And for instance, I did Man City, Real Madrid the other night. 3 players weren't on their roster sheets. Mm-hmm. And so Oscar, on the roster sheet as 23, comes in as number 32. So I look at Adrian Healy and I put my hands up going, here we go again. It's just ICC. So right. I think what you try to do is prepare for the first half as if it's a real game. Right. You have your storylines, major talking points. The second half is really a crapshoot because you may get that player that you know nothing about, a lot of young players. But that's also the time where I first saw Harry Kane. It's also the time I first saw Romelu Lukaku. So I try not to overflow that with info and just let the game kind of go, and maybe we talk big picture. But I remember a goal Harry Kane scored, and now I reflect on that 3 years later when he's arguably the best striker for England. So there may be a moment. Diaz the other night scored a great goal left-footed for Man City. I looked at it and said, you know what? We're probably going to remember this 3-4 years down the line. So they really are the hardest games to prepare for because they are, quote-unquote, glorified friendlies. And that's what they are.
Yeah, you referenced that seeing Harry Kane when you called that Diaz goal the other day, and then Oscar scored a couple minutes later. Take us through your routine during the week. You call generally one MLS game a week, and what is your week of prep like leading into that game?
So usually our games are Sunday. So let's say the game's Sunday. I'll fly back to Boston Monday. On that flight, I'll try to watch one of the teams I'm doing the following weekend, their game. over, and then I'll watch the other team. And then ultimately what we try to set up is I try to, we don't have the fancy stuff that Monday Night Football does, a touch screen or whatnot, but try to set up some tactical point of the team and then show that at the beginning. I'll reach out to coaches, reach out to players. But a lot of that I like to do face-to-face unless there's Jonathan Dos Santos being signed, right? Then you want to build drama and whatnot. But a lot of it I want to do face-to-face because if, one, a coach or player has an issue with something I may have said in the past, I'd much rather do that face-to-face. Because then they know where I'm coming from, but more importantly, I know where they're coming from. So I like to do a lot of my stuff face-to-face, but a lot of it is watching previous games. Because to your question, I'd rather give my point as opposed to someone else's. Now, I'll get good. The coach can tell me I'm wrong. I have no problem with that. But I still want the viewer to know this is what I'm seeing. And then go from there.
So before you talk to the coaches and you watch training...
I'll have two things tactically for both coaches.
Before that?
Yep. That I've noticed a trend. And MLS is... it's on par with the other leagues where things change. Caleb Porter in 2013 was a coach that went after it. Didn't matter if he lost games 4-3. He went after it. Well, 2 years later, he's more pragmatic about things. So, and even within seasons, you can see coaches go to 3 center backs. They'll play wing backs, all that stuff that we all love to talk about. Yep. So that happens in MLS, even though the general public wants to believe that it's just roll it out and play. Coaches are still tactically trying to get at games, and that's where I'll try to have 2 questions for each coach on what they're trying to get out of that game.
How has your style of commentary been received by coaches and players in MLS? Maybe more by coaches. You're much more attuned to world football in many ways and tactical trends than a lot of the other co-commentators that do MLS games.
Well, the good thing for me is I'm not that old yet, and those coaches still remember me as a player.
You played against a lot of them.
Right, so... They all...
Except for Jay, you played with him.
Yeah, exactly. I played with Jay. Played against Jesse Marsh, I played against everybody, and even played for Bruce Arena and Bob Bradley, for that matter. I haven't changed, so at least they have a good background that, listen, you can tell him anything, you can tell him everything. It can be on the record, it can be off the record, but one thing's for certain, he's going to give his opinion, and that's what I try to do, is give my opinion, but also be... access open to anything you think I'm wrong. I don't care. Never has bothered me when someone comes to me as a player, even more so now. I don't see it that way. No problem. So I think it's respected, but I'm also sure there are times where they're listening to it going, God, why is he talking about that point? It doesn't bother me.
How is working with a lot of European-oriented commentators, a lot of European-oriented analysts work for you? Because when you broke in, obviously you were learning the ropes.
Yeah.
You had a style. Your style's evolved.
I'm still learning.
You're always learning, right?
Yep.
But your style has certainly evolved to the point where, from my perspective, I can't speak for Chris, I can't speak for everybody, you're the best American commentator we produce. And that's something I'm very proud of as an American, that you've been able to take your game to the level that European fans, people who are Americans who only watch European football, expect commentators to be at.
To your question, that's ESPN. It's not me. It was what ESPN did. So,
but did you have to work harder than...
Of course. Yeah. It's no different than when you talk to the American player. Ask Alexi Lawless about being an American player trying to play in Italy in 93, 94, and 95. Like, it's still... Ask Landon Donovan about playing in Germany. It's that kind of thing as an American commentator. I don't have an accent. So I could say exactly what Steve McManaman's going to say. It just sounds better because McManaman said it and he played at Liverpool.
Right.
But we could say the exact same thing. I knew that the moment I was interested in doing this. What I give ESPN more credit than any is constructive criticism from day one has been there. And I actually thrive on it. I love it. I appreciate it. I'd much rather have that than sugar-coated. But what they also did, to answer your question, I had 9 different partners my first 18 months. And so play-by-play guys are very unique in this sport. Ian Dark is so different than John Champion. They're both so good. Adrian Healy is unique. They're all unique. Then you throw in, I did Glenn Davis, JP Delacamer, who I did my first entire year with. What an internship that was for me, not only in broadcasting, but in life. I think we were talking about this, I think it's 11 different partners. Rob Stone's in there. So I took it as an internship. I took it as me being at, Ernst & Young and being whatever it is, no different than any other person in their profession. And I said, if I'm going to do this, ESPN's given me a wealth of people that have done this for a living, but also done it the right way. That's how I've learned, and I think that's how I've evolved.
You played most of your career for Stevie Nicol.
Yes.
And
I didn't understand 90% what he said, but that's fine.
And for Paul Mariner, what's it like playing as a player, as the star player, you and Clinton and Stevie Ralston, under those two guys, and then transitioning to working in broadcasting with those two guys?
Well, I can now, working with them, I can actually say certain things that I couldn't say when they was working for them. So,
right.
That's fun. Stevie and Paul, they're more than my ex-coaches. They're friends. They were mentors for me. They were a huge part. Any player will tell you when your name's called week in and week out, no matter what level you're playing at, you'll appreciate those guys, and Stevie and Paul were a huge part of that. Working with them, I don't work with them as much, but when I do, it's always fun to throw it a little, just like what you guys said in 2005, and they're like, dude, we're not doing that here. You know what I mean? That's fun. That's the background of that, but they're just two guys that I idolized and listen to this day.
What about, so JP Telecamera you mentioned in terms of
yes.
kind of being a very much a mentor. The same thing with Landon Donovan too, in many ways as far as Copa America Centenario, is that JP and Landon, it just seemed to be a perfect partnership. And Landon's talked a lot about kind of how JP helped him and mentored him. What things specifically does JP, has he helped you with in terms of those early days as far as bringing you in?
Chris, it's a good question, because you would probably think he would tell me this is what you say in replays, this is what, it had nothing to do with that. What he did is, when you, and I'm sure this is like this in broadcasting schools or whatnot, but you go through the protocol of what to do,
right,
how to do it, when to do it. And I'm not just talking about when the red light's on. I'm also talking about when you sit with coaches, when you talk to GMs in front office, when you do this. JP did all of that. Uh-huh. Now, the difference is Landon did it with JP in a sprint type of thing, right?
Right.
I did it for almost 30 weeks.
Uh-huh.
And doing week in and week out and having those conversations with JP. I still talk to JP, every couple of weeks, still to this day. He's the godfather. He's done it. He's also an American broadcaster that did other sports that has transitioned into soccer and made that his sport.
Sure.
But a lot of it, Chris, was about protocols, on cameras, just all the little things. Quite honestly, I could probably get 10 to 12 credits in school for what he taught me in that first year of just broadcasting 101 stuff that no one would ever tell you, that you learn on the fly. I am more than grateful for that year I had with JP more than anything else, because it really gave me I would say the background to then step into the ring and do games with John Champion, Ian Dark, Adrian Healy, Derek Ray.
Now, Euro 2016, as far as the analysis you gave as a pundit there in France, to me, you were the star of the show in terms of really thought-provoking analysis that made the viewer.
Am I being punked right now? You guys are so complimentary. This is weird. I'm like, someone's going to come out and go, psych!
You're looking for a draw.
but working with Frank Leboeuf, Roberto Martinez, Craig Burley was there too, does that raise your game? I mean, does that make you try to be more competitive?
Chris, it has to.
Right.
It has to, because I'm the American sitting at the table.
Yeah.
Right? And so this has been a challenge from day one that I took on, was not scared to have. Jed Drake, who was a massive part of our 2014 World Cup coverage, looked me in the face and basically said, I don't think you're good enough. And this was right at the beginning of 2002. And I said, give me 6 months. At the end of 6 months, you can write up my contract. And if you don't think I'm good enough. So it's been a challenge from day one.
Yeah.
When you sit with guys like Roberto Martinez and Frank Leboeuf and Michael Ballack and Ruud van Nistelrooy, go up and down the line, Craig Burley, of where these guys played, no matter what, the viewer's going to look at it and look at that little pedigree of the 4 or 5 bullet points and then look at me and go, well, he doesn't know. So I better be prepared, and I better be interesting, where I will say stuff that maybe an Englishman may not say because he played for Tottenham. Yeah. I remember last year for the Euros when I brought up the Tottenham end of the season thing, and that was something where an Englishman at the desk, they're not going to say that.
Yeah.
But I can.
Right.
And I'm not saying it out of spite.
Sure.
I'm saying it because all of us, and I include you guys, all of us are sitting there, that's what we're thinking.
Right, exactly.
So, and if Tottenham ever had a problem, they would reach out. But as long as you say it the right way, and you're not so condescending, no one's really going to get mad. And that goes back to the other question you asked about coaches and players. As long as you are not condescending and you talk down about your analysis or whatever, then it's more of a discussion. It's not a disagreement.
That Tottenham point in particular is illustrative because I had that conversation with someone on the phone the previous night after England had bombed out against Iceland or I can't remember which game. Maybe it was in the group stage.
It was in the group stage.
Right. There are 4 or 5 Tottenham players in that England team. No one makes that point on air other than you. And the person I was talking to said, my goodness, Twellman, you told me Twellman was good. He's really good.
Well, in fairness, though, I think it comes also from sitting and having discussions every day. Like us three are sitting here and you guys are talking about broadcasting and stuff. You do this on those kinds of tournaments every single day. Yeah. The one thing I've learned, and I still learn, is if you don't love it, it's pointless to do traveling 230 days a year. Right. What am I doing then?
Yeah.
You guys, it's stupid for you two to sit here if you didn't love what you did, right? And that's the one thing I think coaches, players, they know I love it. They know my passion's there. I'm going to be wrong, but so what? They know my passion's there. So that's where the discussions of hearing about Tottenham, sitting with McManaman, and maybe Bob Lee's not there, so I'll say, Macca, what do you think about that? Or Roberto, and they'll give me a different, and I won't steal it, but when you sit at the desk, then you're saying, you know what? We could go a different way with this. And then I'll throw it to Bob Lee or Mike and say, ask them this. They got a good answer.
How difficult is it to transition from calling games with Adrian and John and Ian and JP, these guys that are soccer pros, to going on SportsCenter, to going on the other ESPN programs, talking to someone who's a host who's very...
This is the billion-dollar question, Paul. And quite honestly, I think soccer fans and the soccer group, we all need to calm down. And the reason why I say this is we are so, what's the word, inclusive? So if someone screws up a name, and then you ask that anchor or news reporter, why'd you screw it up? And then you do a little background check. They had never seen soccer.
Right.
Now, I think that excuse is died down in 2017.
Yeah.
Because we can see the game, we can see any game in the world, and it takes us 5 seconds on Google to figure out how to say someone's name. So that's, I resonate with that part, but we still have a job of growing the game. They also still have a job of treating the game the right way. And what they don't realize is that baseball is sweating in their shoes right now because soccer's right up their throat. And when I say soccer, everyone thinks MLS. I'm not talking about just MLS. I'm talking the global game. Look at what we're doing in the ICC in Miami.
Right.
They don't get it. But to answer your question, it's not difficult at all because I take that as a challenge and a fun one. And I'm actually an all-sports guy. I played baseball. Probably should have played baseball, right? So I can talk in their language to help them better understand it and not talk down to them because I'd rather have them.
So messes up Thierry Henry's name. He signs with Red Bulls and they call him Henry. You don't get offended.
Nope, I don't. Now Thierry Henry's a bad example because they should get Thierry Henry, right?
But they did that.
Yeah, they did.
What about so you look at yourself? If someone who's worked really hard, has excelled in your position. You also look at Kyle Martino, same type of situation. You look at Landon Donovan too. He's come a long way, and he's kind of one of the rising stars.
Yeah.
Who do you look at?
I think Stuart Holden would be.
Stuart Holden is.
Well, I'm just saying he's working his rear end. He's good at it.
Right.
They're all good at it.
Do you think there's other opportunities? Do you see any other individuals kind of rising up that could be the
Chris,
next big stars?
We talk about that. If you would ask my boss right now, Amy Rosenfeld, Chris Alexopoulos, in 2007, they wrote a list of 10 MLS players. I wasn't in the top 400. They wanted. So
sure.
I think that you don't know.
Yeah.
I really don't think you know.
Right.
I just don't. I knew Kyle would. I was Kyle's host at the University of Maryland when he was thinking about going to Maryland. He went to Virginia after eating all my mom's chocolate chip cookies. I remember 2010 World Cup. I was offered to do something locally in Boston. First person I reached out to was Kyle because I needed Kyle's background. I needed his perspective. What do you do? I wanted nothing to do with media. So, Chris, to answer your question, I don't think anyone knows because if you asked Amy Rosenfeld and Chris Alexopoulos, they would tell you there's no chance in 2007 that I was even on the radar.
Yeah.
So and yet others were, and they never panned out, if that makes any sense.
What was your big break, though? I mean, what changed for them to recognize Taylor's gonna actually could be the guy?
I think once they realized I really wasn't Bull Durham. When I played, I was Bull Durham because I never wanted to get in trouble.
Right.
So I said every cliche. I said everything, so no one got in trouble.
Right.
I think I used the line, I don't know what I'm having for dinner, 4 million times. And everyone had to use it. And finally, people thought it was a bad interview.
Right.
But I was doing it to protect, one, my team,
sure, but
more importantly, myself. Because I knew if you got me unleashed, I was going to say something that either pissed my team off or pissed off the opposition. I think what changed was they gave me 2 games, and I was addicted. It was a challenge. I loved the challenge. I'll give you some, since we've talked a lot about positive stuff. The one thing I cannot stand about broadcasting is I don't win. And you guys didn't really know me as a player. That was the only thing that mattered to me, was winning, which is why I finished second place in every other competition. But that's the hardest thing about broadcasting. If you leave that game, you don't win. Now, when the U.S. wins and you're doing a U.S. game, because you're an ex-U.S. international, people think you won. But the reality is, if you're doing U.S.-Jamaica Gold Cup final, there are Jamaicans watching the broadcast.
Right. Especially down here, where
of
we are
course
sitting right now.
So when you do that, like, that's it. People think you won, but the reality is, I'm done with those games going, God, was I fair to Jamaica? Was I honest about the United States?
Yeah.
All those things. Those are actually harder games to do than just doing Orlando, Atlanta.
So are you more open to kind of feedback, whether it's from fans or critics or other people, as far as just trying to figure out
always
if you can win or not?
Yes, but Chris, you got to also remember, fan comes from the word fanatic.
Right.
And I remember, no matter what, I remember Joe Buck, who's a family friend, said something in an article, and I'll never forget it to the day I die, because he's been heavily criticized, and the guy's pretty good. Yeah. I say that, with a lot of respect. He's amazing. He said, no matter what, at the end of the game, 60% of the viewership hates you because someone's losing.
Yeah. Right.
So,
no
matter what, and a great example of this is I had 3 Man City fans Wednesday night complaining about what I was saying about John Stones. Now, everything I said about John Stones, defending crosses, dealing with balls in wide areas, is 100% true.
And everybody's been saying it too.
100%. But because I don't have the accent, I go on Twitter, so you have to have perspective when you listen to fans. Yeah. But when I look at a fan say something and you click on their profile and then you read some of their tweets, you're like, you know what? He's just being honest, same way I am.
Yeah.
Of course I listen. But a lot of times now it's at a point where you're like, it's just fans being fans, and quite honestly, that's what makes this sport great.
You mentioned Joe Buck. How much does St. Louis shape your perspective? I mean, we think of you as a St. Louis guy.
Yeah, I mean, St. Louis still is where my family is. Brother, sister, mom, and dad. So it's what I am. However, I've lived in Boston now longer in my life than I have in St. Louis. Because my dad played a lot, so I didn't move back to St. Louis.
Yeah, you were in Minnesota for a while, right?
Minnesota and Chicago. So, but I'm a Cardinals fan. I'm a Blues fan. But Boston is now in my blood as much, which makes an odd combination.
Yeah.
St. Louis is friendly. Everybody loves everything, no matter if you hit 180 or 480. Boston is the exact opposite, which I think Boston's probably shaped my media career more than St. Louis.
They booed Jim Rice in Boston. They used to boo Kevin McHale in Boston. That kind of town.
I got booed, by the way, which I loved it.
The last question I have is MLS. Is there any way that MLS can benefit from ICC? I mean, ICC this summer so far has been more competitive. The attendances have been fantastic. Yep. The level of competition, the stars. Is there any way that MLS can take something away from this and
I don't know.
benefit?
I don't know. If you would have asked me, Chris, 4 years ago when I was doing some of these friendlies, I would have told you, you know what, the trend's going down, right?
Yeah.
And in large part, it's because of the success of the sport. I think the fans are more educated.
Yeah.
I think us three, if we sat right now with a bunch of soccer fans, and we can't BS them anymore.
Right.
Because they'll be like, no, actually, that's not true. He played here on loan, and you're like, so you can't do that anymore, where 4 years ago you could get away with it.
Yeah.
I think the ICC is more competitive because I think there's just more pressure. Right. I think the way that the fact that Man City has to spend £150 million for fullbacks and a goalkeeper tells you where the pressure is in the world, and particularly England. I don't know, Chris. I don't know, because there's part of me that looks at MLS and says, right during this time, LA Seattle means something.
Yeah.
Now, do I think MLS could progress where these dog days of the summer, the games mean a little bit more? Yes, and I think in large part you got to cut down the playoffs. Right? So then the games actually start meaning something a little bit sooner as opposed to August 1st, which you guys hear me say it every time I broadcast. That's when it matters.
Yeah.
You look at Seattle, you go through the years. August 1st, that's when you turn it around. But from the ICC, I don't know. I just think it's, listen, Real Madrid and Barcelona can play anywhere in the world, and they're going to get 90,000 people.
Absolutely.
Those are the two brands that, I don't know. That's a really good question. I'm not sure. What has stand out, actually, and let me finish this, is you guys do this very well because it's a global thing, but often in our country, we still think England is the league.
Yeah.
Right? And those are the brands.
Right.
They are, until you really see Real Madrid and Barcelona take on Man City, and there's not a single City fan. I'm telling you, it was one for every 1,000. Wow. It was insane in LA.
Yeah.
And even Adrian looked at me and he's like, this is such a good example of what the global scale is.
Right.
It's these two, and I'm sorry, but then it is United, City, Chelsea, Bayern Munich. Everybody's chasing these two.
Yeah, and I think that's something we've learned the last few years in this country, because we put the English League on a pedestal, but there's so many more fans.
Well, they do it better than anyone.
Right.
On drama. And that's actually, you know what? MLS could learn something about the rest of the world. And it's during the ICC when you see this. You have to be part of the rumor mill.
Right. Yeah.
That can of worms has to be open.
Yeah. And that was one of the things you said after the Euros. I think you said before the Euros, you were hearing some of the MLS stories. Yeah. You came back after the Euros 2016. There was no new stories. Nothing had changed. There was nothing new to talk about. And that's so much a big part of the Premier League as far as the drama, the soap opera.
Why are you in it?
Right.
Why are we all in it? Because you're on Twitter, you're reading it. And
exactly.
Listen, 99% of them are fake.
Yeah.
But MLS is, I think, starting to learn that. If you look at the last, I'd say, 10 days, all of a sudden the Jonathan Dos Santos and the Dom Dwyers and the Bob Bradleys and the Ziggy Schmidts, they're starting to get that.
Yeah.
But, Chris, that's what I would, to now come full circle, during the ICC, 90% of what I'm going to talk about on SportsCenter today is still Mbappe. It's still rumors.
Right. Yeah.
What does Gareth Bale do? MLS has to figure out a way to get into that, even if it's a smaller scale.
Right.
But we should be, us three should be talking about, well, I don't know, does Seattle trade Clint Dempsey with 6 months left on his deal?
Yeah.
And it's okay.
Yeah.
Like, sometimes
okay to
at
talk about
MLS,
that.
they're like, oh my God, you're talking about, it's like, no, this is what you do.
It's
what the rest of the world
Kyrie
does.
Irving and the Cleveland Cavs have been starting on SportsCenter for 10 days. That's how you create buzz.
I see, and I have two more questions for you, and one was right on that line, so good segue. Siggy comes in to LA. Comes back to LA, I should say. To me, that's a watershed moment because Analfo gets six months.
If that.
With injuries, with a team that lost Robbie Keane, with a team that lost Landon Donovan's return, lost a bunch of players.
Steven Gerrard, Jeff Lorenowitz, Mike McGee.
Lorenowitz, who goes to Atlanta, right?
Yep.
Loses Mike McGee, and then doesn't get Jermaine Jones fully fit.
Yep.
Doesn't have a lot of guys fully fit. But anyway, the point being, is MLS changing, or is it the Galaxy, because the Galaxy have established themselves as a brand, that they're only going to give a coach 4 months?
Well, it's also the Galaxy and LAFC coming in the following year. But
so is the pressure higher on the Galaxy this year because LAFC
no doubt
is
about
coming
it.
in?
And anyone that tells you otherwise is completely...
And were they concerned that the LAFC was going to hire Siggy? Because I thought he would be their coach. I was surprised.
Well, John Thornton and Ziggy Schmidt have great history. We played together for Ziggy on the Under-20 World Cup in 1999. So, yeah, there's history there. Bob Bradley was the front runner the whole time. But to your point, listen, I'm going to give Chris Klein and LA Galaxy some credit. I still think they make the move, whether LAFC's coming in. But I do think that is the cherry on the top, the whipped cream on top, because LAFC's coming in, they're chasing Zlatan, they're both chasing Zlatan. So that pressure builds. But LA Galaxy, they need to make the playoffs. And everyone's saying Kurt Onalfo didn't get a fair enough shot. In fairness, you could also argue he gave a ton of time to the LAG2 players that he knows better than anyone else, and didn't maximize that. But injuries were a big part of it. But listen, coaches are hired to be fired. It's that saying. There's no coach that's been there forever. There's Sir Alex Ferguson. Doesn't happen, right? So For us in our job, I think we need more accountability in that area, and I'm okay. I'm okay with the move.
Last thing, I have to ask you about this: head injuries. Is FIFA doing enough? Is
No.
UEFA doing enough? U.S. Soccer doing enough?
U.S. Soccer is moving the needle. You'll see it in the next couple of weeks. That's all I'll give you on that, but we are doing stuff there. But U.S. Soccer is pushing certain things with the FIFA Medical Board, but where everything is a real black and white issue, when it comes to FIFA, it becomes very, very gray. And the fact that head injuries is in that discussion bothers me more than anything, because they know the amount of stuff, questions, answers, inquiries behind, off the record, behind closed doors that I get from people in Europe. And everyone listening to this right now, if you think this is, no one in England's listening, no one in Germany's listening, you have no idea. It really is the elephant in the room. No one wants to talk about it. Nobody wants to address it head on, no pun intended. And it's really an easy switch to start the process of learning how we change the game. If you have independent medical professionals on the side.
Right.
Chelsea's the best example, because I'm forgetting her name, it's drawing a blank, but her dilemma with Jose Mourinho. Eva, thank you. That's ridiculous. A coach should have 0.0 say on any medical thing. But if it's independent, that also helps Eva.
Right.
And that's what people don't understand.
Yeah.
Because what people don't get is coaches look at the training staff as they're below them. No, I dictate. Look at how Bill Belichick's done the Patriots guys. He answers the medical questions. What are we doing?
Right.
Like, it doesn't make any sense to me.
Have the authorities, regulatory authorities in Europe, have they talked to you?
Yeah, they're asking questions. They're talking
good.
to. The thing is, though, this isn't about me. I would love for U.S. Soccer to drive the conversation, because 20 years, 30 years, 40 years down the road, I want U.S. Soccer to deserve the credit for changing and being proactive. No heading under the age of 10. Let's have a substitution rule where you can sub the player.
Yep.
Let's do that right. We all know we could do that. Everyone that tells us we can't do it, we know we could do that.
That's why I still,
I don't
when
understand how we
MLS
have
experimented with the fourth sub for the goalkeeper, I still supported that. I still think that's a good idea.
Yep, I think U.S. Soccer is on the verge of doing that in the Development Academy, which is more important to me, because I'm more worried about the kids. Because if I educate the kids at 8, 9, 10, 11, then when they're pros, if I'm educating the pros, I'm late. That's why my foundation and my message is more for the parents and kids, because I'm not really going to tell a 22, 25-year-old man or woman what to do.
Yeah.
They can do that. They're over 18. That's not my job.
So, John, I wanted to ask you, first of all,
Yes.
who is John Champion? Because we hear your voice so often, especially Friday nights, championship matches, oftentimes 2 or 3 Premier League games a weekend, probably one of the hardest working commentators in the business. But who is John Champion? So what type of thing, what are you like in terms of your personal life? What's outside football and some of the hobbies or things that you enjoy doing?
Well, given my schedule, sometimes there isn't as much outside football as I might wish, but I've got a big family. I'm married with 4 children who are rapidly growing up. So I've got a daughter who's 22 who works in the cosmetics industry and marketing in London for Elizabeth Arden. She's just graduated from university. I've got a 19-year-old son who is at St Andrews University and is currently in Cambodia, getting some work experience, which is interesting. I've seen some of the pictures, and I don't envy that accommodation. I've got another boy of 17 who's still at school, and then a young one who's not so young, of 14, who's also evidently still at school. So that's my sort of family setup, and we live in a lovely area of England called the Cotswolds, Gloucestershire. It's about 90 miles northwest of London, very rural, and I live in a tiny village of 130 people. I live in a house that is 350 years old. I recently had its history researched, just out of interest, and we found that the first owner of the land was Queen Elizabeth I, and that Thomas Jefferson's best friend used to live in our house. So some interesting things come up. But this lovely village, in the middle of rolling countryside, we've got as facilities a village hall, an ancient chapel, and a very good pub, which is at the bottom of our drive. So it's a great place to live, and it's also, on a practical level, very easy to get around the country, being in the middle of England rather than down in the south or up in the north.
Okay. And so in an interview a few years ago, actually about 4 years ago, you said that you were thinking back to a day, January 7th, 1978, which was York City 2,
Yes.
Newport County 0. And he said, I love the match day experience. It stays with me. Even if I'm watching football on the other side of the world, it still traces me back to that day. Well, we are on the other side of the world. We are not too far from Miami. We're getting ready for the Clasico this weekend. What is it about that match that you still remember that still kind of traces you back to that day?
I think it was the fact that I'd had to wait so long to go and watch my first professional football match in part. So I was 12 at the time, and my father was a school teacher in a boarding school, which was about a quarter of a mile from the York City Stadium. And because he was a housemaster, we lived in a house in the school. And I suffered the agony for years of being able to hear the crowd oohing and ahhing on a Saturday afternoon, and they would never take me to go and see it. My father had to work on a Saturday, he was never free. And eventually one of his colleagues one day, as I was moaning on a Saturday lunchtime, why can't I go to the football, Dad? Come on, Dad, you've got to let me go. He said, well, look, I'll take you. So at an hour's notice, we went to see this game between York City and Newport County. And I remember walking into the ground and just seeing the enthusiasm and the engagement of the people, all wearing scarves. It was midwinter. They were huddled up. They were wearing the same club colours. And then we got into the ground, and as we walked past the back of the main stand, you could smell first the hot dogs, and then you could smell the liniment as well that the players were rubbing on their muscles on a cold winter's day. And then we went and stood behind the ground, and the crowd, I was in the middle of the crowd, and it was swaying one way and then the other. And I was just completely wrapped up by the spectacle and the engagement of the people that were there. And I think partly because I've been denied it for so long, I was just hooked.
Yeah. So when did you know you wanted to become a football commentator?
I didn't. I fell into it. Briefly, my story is I went to school, wasn't at all academic, got some dreadful A-levels, which is sort of the results at the end of high school, that would get me nowhere near a university place in this day and age. I thought I needed some time to decide what to do, and I wanted to go travelling as well. So I took a job at the British Lending Library up in Yorkshire, which was a great big warehouse. And my job was to go and receive a request, and there were hundreds a day from academics around the world wanting an article from a particular scientific or medical journal. I had to photocopy it and send it off to them from this vast store. I mean, the British Lending Library is one of the biggest of its type in the world. So I did that for about 6 months with the intention of earning enough money to go travelling after that. And after about 4 months, I played in a cricket match one day, and I got a few runs. This was in my home city of York. And I retired to the bar afterwards, quite happy with the day's events. And after about 3 pints of Yorkshire Bitter, the phone rang in the clubhouse, and it was the local radio station wanting to interview me about the day's proceedings. By this stage, I was quite happy to talk for as long as anyone wanted. So I did, and waxed lyrical, and thought no more about it, returned to the clubhouse and had a very good night. And about 2 weeks later, the phone rang at home, and it was the sports editor of the local radio station, a newly set up BBC station, saying, look, we're trying to set up a sports department. We need someone to report on a bit of football and rugby. And this may sound very strange to you, but we really like the sound of your voice, and you sounded quite fluent. Do you fancy giving it a go? So I thought, well, why not? This sounds like a great opportunity just to have some fun. So I just passed my driving test, which meant I was able to actually get to the games, which was a plus. I didn't know what I was doing, but I got sent off with a tape recorder to do the after-match interviews and did a couple of things. And then about 6 weeks later, they rang again, the same sports editor, to say, we think you've got something here. And if you're interested in making something more, possibly a career out of this, then we would support you in that. I thought, well, that really is something to think about. So I took about 30 seconds to think about it and thought, yeah, let's give it a go. But he went on to say, look, the BBC only really recruits graduates. You need to go away. Just have the experience of 3 years away, mature a bit, get yourself some sort of academic qualification as a backup, and we'll give you work at weekends. And as long as you train on, we'll sort you out at the end of the process. So I somehow managed to get on a forerunner of a media degree course in Leeds, another of the big cities in the north of England. I think its full title was Communication with Cultural Studies and Public Media. It's got a bit snappier since then. So I went and did this for 3 years. It was a Catholic teacher training college that I ended up at, so I soon knew the words to every single Pogues song. So this was completely new as an environment to me. And sure enough, the BBC were as good as their word, and every weekend I would have at least one football match to go and cover. And then gradually it got more and more, and I found myself working in midweek as well, and the money supplemented my university grant income, so it smoothed my path through that time of my life. And then 6 weeks before my final exams at college, there was a phone call from the personnel department of the BBC in London to say that a job was coming up for a sports reporter at BBC Radio Leeds. And was I interested, because they'd already booked me in for an interview. And they said, these are the questions we're going to ask you, and these are the answers we'd quite like to hear. So I thought, I've got a chance here. And he ended up by saying, 3 o'clock Friday, Broadcasting House, don't forget to wear a tie. So I went in and parroted these answers, and surprise, surprise, got the job. And they kept it open while I finished my finals. And the week after my university time ended, or college time, I started work at the BBC in Leeds, did that for 18 months, got a job offer from Radio 2 Sport, the national sports station in London, which was a huge thrill, at the end of 1989, and went down there, and on my first day I walked into an office that contained really the great and the good of British sports broadcasting. Peter Jones, the most mellifluous and wonderful Welsh commentator who'd done Hillsborough and Heysel and had been the voice of my childhood, listening on a transistor radio to hissy broadcasts of matches in far-flung European destinations as Liverpool carried all before them. Brian Butler with his marvellous Somerset tones, the football correspondent. Christopher Martin Jenkins did the cricket. Ian Robertson did the rugby. Peter Bromley, very acerbic individual but a wonderful broadcaster, was the racing man. And I found myself as the sort of office junior in the corner. But I was very lucky. Things fell into place, and within 3 months I was asked to present Sport on 2, which is the flagship Saturday afternoon programme, which leads into Sports Report with the famous music at 5 o'clock. And it was the day of the boat race, and I remember that day for 2 reasons, really. One, it was a breakthrough moment in my career, being given an iconic programme to do, and I was 24 years of age at the time, so it came very early for me. And the second one, and the sadder one, was that Peter Jones was the commentator on the boat race, and he had covered everything. He'd just reached the age of 60 and had retired from the staff of the BBC. And I can't stress to you how influential a figure he was in radio broadcasting. He would do not just sporting events but royal occasions of state as well. And there was a lot of the actor about him. He had a wonderful sense of drama and of presentation and how to convey a moment. And he did the boat race, and I handed over to him, and I'd seen him in the morning, and as usual he was carrying a great big pile of books under his arm. He was a very well-read man, and he said, "Good luck, young man, I'll talk to you later." And he started to do the commentary, and about 5 minutes in, his voice started to slur, and eventually it just reduced to nothing. And Dan Topolsky, who was a famous rowing coach, took over from him, and we were thinking, well, what's going on here? And sadly, what rapidly became clear was that he'd suffered a huge heart attack in the middle of this, and he was on a launch in the middle of the River Thames covering the boat race. They couldn't get him to shore very quickly, and sadly he didn't make it. And so I then had to do my first ever sports report at 5 o'clock to say we didn't know he died at that stage, but that he was seriously ill in hospital, and this was an event of national resonance. The phone was ringing off the hook in the office outside the studio. And he was in hospital for the weekend, and then on Monday I had to present what they called the 6:45 Sports Desk on Radio 2. It came off the back of the John Dunn show, for people that remember those days, on Radio 2. And that was a quarter of an hour that summed up the day's sport. Right. And it was announced about 2 hours before we went on air that he had passed away. And his closest friend was Cliff Morgan, the Welsh rugby international, a former head of sport at the BBC. And it was decided that we would clear the decks to pay respect to Peter in this 6:45 bulletin, which was listened to by millions of people. And Cliff sat opposite me in the studio, and I said, "Good evening, welcome to Radio 2 on a very different and sad day. It's 6:45, and rather than give you today's sports news, we need to reflect on the very sad passing of our colleague Peter Jones, and here to do so, his lifelong friend and colleague Cliff Morgan." And I handed to Cliff, and he sat opposite me, and it was one of the most magnificent pieces of broadcasting and oratory I've ever heard. He sat there without a piece of paper, with tears running down his face, and in the way that only a man of Wales could, paid tribute to Peter for 14 and a half minutes, giving me 15-20 seconds to sign off at the end. And that stays with me, because I don't know how he did it, but the fact that he did do it was just jaw-dropping and magnificent.
Yeah. Do you think, before I hand it over to Kartik, do you think in some ways, in terms of radio's been so influential for so many commentators,
yes.
Even hospital radio, for a lot of the Martin Tylers of the world, and it's been such a big difference maker for the UK British commentators, and one of the reasons why people like yourself and others are some of the best in the world. In terms of today's day and age where you have Talk Sport and yes, definitely Radio 5 is still involved quite a bit with radio broadcasts. But it doesn't seem to be. Do you think it is going to have an impact on the future generations of UK commentators? Perhaps?
I think it will, because it's an obvious recruiting ground.
Right.
I think the danger in all of this is that there is really no earthly reason why a very good radio commentator should become a very good television commentator, because they are almost entirely different jobs.
Right.
So on the radio, you're an artist with a blank canvas in front of you and you can paint pictures, and it's a terrific luxury to have. It also demands great skill. If you listen to people like John Murray on BBC Radio, tremendous at doing that. So what then tends to happen, and it happened in my case, is that you get offered a chance because you're considered a good radio commentator on the television. And yes, it means that you're at home on the air and you're not overly nervous and you're not going to keel over through sheer excitement. But at the same time, the job is utterly different, because you are just there to caption the picture that's provided for you. Your words, however good, however well thought out, can never trump the work of 26 television cameras around a ground, and you're silly to try and take that on. So all you can really do is become a guide. It's a bit like being a good referee, where you're not really noticed for the majority of the time.
Right.
And this was brought home to me because when I was given my Match of the Day chance, they sent me with John Motson to Selhurst Park to a game that he was covering for Match of the Day. And they said, look, it's going to take you 10 years to become a proper television commentator, and probably 20 before you're really at the level where you can be a number one commentator. And I sat next to him, and he barely spoke during the game. He sat there, and it was as if, this was obviously the highlights, but the point remains, he would sit there with his microphone on his lap on top of his notes for what seemed like minutes on end. It probably wasn't that long.
Right.
And then when I listened to his broadcast that evening on the BBC, it was seamless because it had all been knitted together. But I think what I'm saying is that the radio vis-a-vis preparation for TV thing is very interesting, because yes, of course it's good preparation, but it's by no means the whole story. And I think there is a bit of a blurring of the lines now if you listen on TV.
Yeah.
There are a lot of people that talk an awful lot, and maybe that's the way forward, but it's not the way I was taught to do it.
You're extremely good at scene setting before matches, as you enter a match, painting a picture for the audience as to the context of the match and what is going to unfold in front of you on your television screen. Does that, do you owe that to your radio background?
Yes, yeah, without question. Because that's the one bit of TV where you are, in a sense, painting a verbal picture. And if you're working in tandem with a good director, and you can ask him for some pictures to support what you're intending to say, then I think it works quite effectively. But I think one thing that is common of both radio and TV is that when a broadcast starts, you've got 30 seconds to capture your audience, to make them aware that this is actually worth staying up for, getting up for, whatever it may be, that this demands their attention for the next 90 minutes to 2 hours.
What's your sense on the commentary style that you have to employ for the international audience? You do a lot of games, both Football League and Premier League for the international audience, and then a different type of broadcast potentially for a very British audience.
I suppose it's probably slightly broader brushstrokes for the international audience, which is not to say that you're dealing with an audience that doesn't know as much. It's just that you're dealing with such a broad spectrum, because you're not. If I turn up on a Saturday tea time, UK time, to do Tottenham against Manchester United, I'm not just broadcasting to the US, I'm broadcasting to all sorts of territories around the world, many of them very small, and you need to talk and work in a way where everybody is going to understand what's going on. So maybe you take it back a notch or two from doing a domestic commentary, but I think people now are so knowledgeable around the world that you don't have to make too many compromises. Maybe for the international audience, there's a temptation to talk a little bit more. I try and resist that. I think if I have any sort of hallmark at all, it's probably that I talk less than most, just on the basis that I think if you talk all the time, people switch off mentally, right, and it becomes wallpaper. Yeah. So if you have fewer words, those words you do use hopefully have a greater impact. That's my equation.
Do you ever get nervous, though? I mean, there's a big match this weekend at Clasico, probably the biggest match this year. worldwide audience, but especially in the US. I mean, do you ever get nervous before a match?
Well, I think you're always aware that you're operating without a safety net, and that one slip could lead to quite a nasty injury.
Right.
So, to that degree, yes, but I don't sit there shaking. It doesn't inhibit me. I'm just aware that I can't afford to mess this up. I think that's the best way of putting it. Years ago, I would get more nervous.
Right.
And, still, if I was doing a cup final, there'd be a little frisson beforehand. But I think you learn to cope with these things over the years and use it as a spur and use the adrenaline it provides rather than being inhibited by it.
What's your week like? You call 2, 3, 4 games a weekend, whether it's Football League, Premier League. There have been days where you've called 2 matches in a day.
Yes.
And I probably may have been the one who made you aware of that.
Yes, you were, Kartik.
On Twitter.
Yeah.
But how do you prepare during the week for, let's say, a Friday Football League match and then quickly a turnaround Saturday Premier League, Sunday Premier League?
Tougher at the start of the season where you've not seen the sides. So what I'm going back to next week in the UK will be a fair few shifts of hard labour, just getting my head around the new squads, trying to see them in action, either in person or via tape of some description. I think there's a difference. If you were doing one game a week, which used to be my existence for UK domestic television, you give that everything, and you go and watch them train. You talk to people behind the scenes. You watch endless videos to make sure you're absolutely up to speed. You just don't have that luxury if you're doing, say, 2 games for the World Feed in the Premier League over the weekend, sometimes 3 now with the Friday night matches as well, plus Football League game, and maybe I've been out in Europe doing European football for BT during the week. So you have to pare it down a little bit. But you still probably spend, to do a Premier League game, you probably want a day's preparation ahead of it. It might have been 3 days before, but it'd be a day. So it is a question of trying to work everything in, and it doesn't leave a great deal of spare time. But the payback is that every other summer you get some time off, which has been this summer, which has been great. So I encounter you at my most relaxed in what feels like years. It's wonderful. I don't know how long it'll last, mind you.
For El Clasico this weekend, so would you try to, if it's a stadium you haven't been to or a stadium that's been renovated, would you try to go there before the match?
Yeah, I'd go and have a little look.
Acquainted with it,
see what the commentary position is like as well, because that has a big bearing. So in the last week I've been to Santa Clara, where we were a million miles away from the pitch, and then we were at FedEx Field, where you're quite close and quite low down.
Right.
I actually prefer higher because it gives you a better perspective on the game, and if 5 heads go up for a first-minute corner, gives you a better chance of identifying who's actually got their head to the ball, rather than lower down where you can't see through the players.
Yeah.
I'd have a look at Hard Rock Stadium and just see exactly what it's like. But it'll be strange. This will be my first game in Florida since the 1994 World Cup, Orlando.
Yeah, I remember
in the Citrus Bowl.
That's right.
So when water bottles were being thrown on the side by John Aldridge and Jack Charlton and things like that.
Right,
So
it's
happy
so
memories. But no, it's great to be back.
Excellent.
You work closely with Marty. You referenced that earlier. Talk a little bit about his influence on your career and his influence on broadcasting in Britain in general.
He's just been there forever, which is said in the nicest possible way. I mean, he's still active now, still works for Match of the Day, still does a really good job. But he was, because the BBC and ITV were the only places to go for live football, there were really 3 TV commentators for probably 25 or 30 years who hogged centre stage. So there was John Motson, Barry Davis, both of them at the BBC, and Brian Moore, a former BBC radio commentator who was the main man at ITV. So if you switched on a live TV game, and there were probably only 2 or 3 a year, maybe the FA Cup final, sometimes England-Scotland might make it, then after a while the European Cup final would be shown in the days before the Champions League. It'd be one of those 3 doing it. I think Motti captured the imagination in particular because he was and is such an enthusiast. I mean, he'll still take himself off to watch Barnet midweek or Watford or Luton or somewhere close to his home just because he loves it so much. It might have nothing to do with his working schedule, but he will still go. And what the BBC had in those days was the great enthusiast in John Motson and a very erudite broadcaster in Barry Davis. Polar opposites in many respects, and yet they complemented each other beautifully. And either one of them could have been the main man for 30 years, but it was a bit like the England goalkeeping position with Ray Clemence and Peter Shilton. Right. Either of them would have walked into just about any other team in the world, but they just happened to coincide. So I think from John's point of view, there are 2 parts to his career, really. The first one is emerging in the late 1960s on the radio, getting a move to television, doing the famous FA Cup tie at Edgar Street, Hereford against Newcastle, where Ronnie Radford scored a goal that's replayed every year at the start of the FA Cup, and that was his big breakthrough moment. And then he sailed on for 20 years, and then there was a change of management at the BBC, and suddenly he wasn't doing the World Cup final, and he wasn't doing the FA Cup final, and Barry was. And then off the back of that, to me, and I've never really talked to him about it in any detail, but there was almost a reinvention of John Motson, and Motty became the moniker, and he came back, and I think people had missed him, and he was welcomed back, and he regained the World Cup final and the FA Cup finals, and did another, nearly 20 years. So sheer longevity, enthusiasm, the fact he was always a welcome voice in people's living rooms. I think, you are a very privileged guest in people's homes when you're a TV sports announcer, and I think he always appreciated that.
How have you found the sophistication of American audiences? It's now been 3 years you've been doing games here in the States. Now, we've heard your voice for 20 years,
yes.
But 3 years you've done games specifically for the States audience. Is it different than the UK audience, and how do you find the soccer knowledge?
Soccer knowledge, really good without question. I contrast that to being here for the 94 World Cup, which was a strange event because it was as if there wasn't a World Cup on as I travelled around the country then. Yes, at the stadiums you knew it was on, but there was nothing at the railway stations, the airports, in the host cities. Now you get a real sense that football, whilst by no means the dominant sport here, is a factor. And I sat in my hotel room in Santa Clara the other day, and there were 4 consecutive games on network TV. There was an MLS game on ESPN, 2 ICC games, and then Fox had the US national team off the back of that. So there were opportunities now to watch soccer at all hours of day and night, which were not there certainly in 94. I guess they probably weren't there in 2004 either. So in terms of sophistication, I really don't notice too much of a difference between the US audience and that in the UK. I notice slight differences between doing MLS and doing the Premier League, but they're welcome differences. What I love about America is the enthusiasm. At home we sit there with our glass half empty, and here you sit here with a glass half full.
What has it been like actually working with ESPN? I mean, you've done now World Cup games, you've done across the board MLS games, US men's national team games, El Clasico Miami. What has that experience been like, just working with the team behind the scenes at ESPN?
Oh, they're great. I mean, Amy Rosenfeld heads up the department. Chris Alexopoulos is her right-hand man, who's terrific. And I think there's a wider point there that actually the coverage of soccer on US TV is well served by executives like those 2 I just mentioned, by people like Pierre Moussa at NBC, by people like John T. Whitehead at Fox. These are people that know the industry, know the sport, and know a good way forward for their organisation. That might be a different way forward. Fox want to have a much more American slant on their coverage, and I understand that. But the fact you've got people who are really engaged and really want this to succeed, I think is so important. So in answer to your original question about ESPN, the first thing that struck me was the scale, the scale of the organisation. So when I called the 2014 World Cup for them, they tried to get me for 2010, and I'd already signed a contract with ITV to do it in the UK. So 2014 came round, and it was the 7th World Cup I'd been fortunate enough to do, and I had never seen anything like the scale of the operation that ESPN mounted. Most notably, the venue for the host set on the beach in Rio, where, as I understand it, they pretty much bought a yacht club. They hadn't rented it, they'd just gone and bought the thing. And then I walked into the first talent meeting, and there was Ballack and obviously Macca, Steve Manaman I'd worked with many times before, and there was Santi Solari, and any number of world football figures. And clearly, money had been no object, and it was fantastic to be part of something like that. And off the back of that, they had then offered me the opportunity to do more, so I have a contract whereby I have a certain number of appearances to do in the US each year, and I look forward to those visits. So I think I had 6 visits last year. I'll have 5 or 6 this year. They usually culminate in doing an MLS playoff semi-final second leg sometime in November, so I'm inked in for the 5th or 6th of November this year. Goodness knows where we'll be, but last year it was Sporting Kansas City against LA Galaxy. Right. Skeljan Gashi scored from the neighbouring state with a shot that...
all of that.
Oh, I remember seeing the low behind the goal angle from the opposite end, and that ball at altitude did things that I'd never seen a football do before. But that was a great experience.
One of the things that we've been amazed by is and actually we've enjoyed a lot, is the NBC Sports has made a conscious effort on interviewing the commentators, getting the commentators' viewpoints before a match, and actually having the camera on the commentator. For example, I mean, I think just this last season or maybe the season before, it's probably the first time actually for the US audience I've actually seen Peter Drury on camera.
Yes.
And I've seen pictures of him, but actually seeing him there talking, and I think quite a few times that you've had
we probably do 20, 25 of those a season. So, more or less every week we do one from one of our games. And I understand why they do it, and I think it's a nice idea. I mean, that's just a sort of bolt on to my working day, because we're actually there purely at the behest of a company called Premier League Productions, which is a wing of the Premier League, who produce all the worldwide coverage and the magazine shows that you occasionally see here. And they have a 24-hour channel as well, which goes around to broadcasters around the world who are rights holders of the Premier League. And then, in addition to doing the commentary, which NBC on occasion take when Arlo or whoever isn't there for them, we also do pre-match stand-ups. Sometimes we do 3 or 4 before a game. So typically it would be beIN Sports for the Middle East and North Africa, NBC for the US. Quite often we do Rogers for Canada. Sometimes we do Super Sport for Sub-Saharan Africa. Occasionally the Australian rights holder might want something. But strangely, the Slovakian rights holder got very interested in having stand-ups. Towards the end of the season. So that's how that happens.
Those stand-ups have been great for us, at least for a lot of our viewers, because before that we really hadn't seen Jon Champion, say, like on television, unless we were having to catch an interview here or there.
Right, yes.
So it kind of adds, I guess we can see the face behind the voice.
I guess it also, it allows NBC to claim a degree of ownership over the commentary as well. Even if it is a world feed commentary, they can make it feel like it's theirs, because they've seen the commentators with NBC mic flags before the game.
Absolutely.
The Premier League is very much a Sky creation, but you have the unique history of having worked for Setanta when they got the rights and became the first channel in the UK to show matches that wasn't Sky.
Yes.
Then you went to ESPN UK and now BT. How has that evolution played out, and also is there a difference in how you approach commentary from each of those 3 networks?
So not really between Setanta and ESPN UK. BT tend to use a 3-man booth, so there's a difference in emphasis there.
Is that a general trend in commentary, the 3-man booth?
Not really, no. I mean, we are seeing a little bit more of it. I think there's a desire to be different on the part of some TV sports executives, and that's a point of difference. It helps you to get noticed, and then you need to take a longer-term view as to whether it works better than what went before, and people will have differing opinions on that, I suppose. But no, Setanta was interesting. It was a watershed moment in the TV sports broadcasting landscape, because it came at a time when it was felt that Sky were perhaps getting a little bit too dominant, and so legislation was put in place which meant that they couldn't be the only domestic rights holders. And what Setanta did was, I think there were 6 packages of rights up for offer, and everyone expected that Sky would get 5 and another organisation would get 1, and in fact Setanta managed to find the money through venture capitalists to get 2, which came as quite a shock to Sky. But it still didn't really alter the balance of things. And I think what we've learnt over the last 10 years of pretenders to Sky's crown coming in is that the only thing that defines the success of a sports TV network in the UK is Premier League rights. However much rugby or cricket, tremendous sports and great action, however much of that you've got, however much of the Football League you've got, however much, arguably, of the Champions League you've got, it's having that bulk 100-plus Premier League matches, the weekly soap opera that you can cover more or less in full. That's the thing by which you stand or fall.
Right. What about solo commentaries? Because oftentimes the championship matches, it's you by yourself.
Yes.
I mean, does that... I guess my question would be, in some ways, it's difficult because, I mean, I'm sure you have opinions about matches and about what's going on the field. It's kind of that balance between trying to give the commentary, but also... in a solo commentary, would you try to give a little bit more opinion?
You've got to give a little bit more opinion, but it's not particularly comfortable territory to go into, because what are my qualifications to give opinion? Mm-hmm. You know, compared to a Craig Burley or a Taylor Twellman or someone on NBC or on Sky, Gary Neville. I mean, I'm not qualified to do that. So sure. It's a necessity to cross that line occasionally, just to provide a relatively complete commentary. Mm-hmm. But I think it reflects the fact that no one's hiding the issue that those are done on a budget, those Football League commentaries, because there are not, compared to the Premier League, as many takers around the world to pay for them.
Right. You do a lot of Champions League matches midweek for BT. how and have done them for ITV in the past, etc. How much does this ICC help prepare you for that? Because you're seeing the same teams you're going to see in Europe.
Yes. In theory, I am, but the chances of getting Real Madrid, Barcelona, Manchester United first up are relatively slim. I'll probably end up with Ajax against someone, or so. But no, of course it's useful because I know at some point during the course of the season I'm going to encounter all these sides. It's been good seeing Manchester United up close a couple of times because I got them fairly early season against Everton. But it's now so much easier than it ever was before to get access to DVDs or to video footage of any club in the world in any league. So it's not perhaps quite the issue that it once was, where the only way to find out what Real Madrid looked like was to order up a tape from Spanish television and wait for it to be sent. We've gone past those days, thankfully, so it becomes less arduous.
How far in advance would you know in terms of commentary? So you mentioned the Man United-Everton match, but would you know several weeks in advance for some of the other matches?
I know my Premier League schedule through until the end of October.
Okay.
So what you really need to know, Christopher, is that I will be at the Liberty Stadium for Swansea against Newcastle in early September.
Excellent, good stuff.
And looking forward to it because I was pleased that they hung on in there at the end of last season.
And as far as those assignments, are some of them geography related too, in terms of, or just more in terms of...
It tends to be a bit of a lottery. I mean, as it happens, of all the commentators, I live closer to Swansea than anyone else, so I'm always very happy to put my hand up and say, look, I'll go to Swansea. But no, generally it's just, there's a slot, right, there's a name, let's marry those two things up.
And as far as the co-com team, so is it usually that you're paired up with most likely the same individual most times?
Not really. No, that rotates as well.
Okay.
So, I mean, Peter and I tend to do the bulk of the Premier League games. Martin Tyler tends to do Monday nights when he's not got a Sky commitment. Yeah. Jim Proudfoot has come in to do what are in the UK the 3 o'clock kickoffs, usually with Matt Holland. Yeah. And then
those aired now in the UK?
They're not aired in the UK.
Okay.
They're aired in Ireland. So that game tends to be the game that Sky, who have the rights for Ireland, are showing in the Republic of Ireland. That tends to be the case. And then the co-coms, Jim Beglin does a lot. Kevin Kilban has come in to do quite a few. Andy Townsend does a lot. And he's a big contributor to the 24-hour Premier League channel that we were talking about. In fact, he's now presenting some of their football shows as well, which he's doing very well. And then David Prutner's come in, who's been making waves at Sky, although they seem to be using him more as a football presenter than a co-commentator, which is the role that PLP have him in. Matt Holland does a few. We're lucky, we're well served. I mean, it's an attractive gig for those guys because it gets their name out in front of an awful lot of people.
Does Premier League Productions have to clear your schedule with BT? How do they coordinate the two entities?
Well, I have separate arrangements with the two, and because if BT want me to go and call a Premier League game, as happened last season, then they because I have a contract with Premier League Productions, they have to talk, and sometimes they'll say yes, and I suspect sometimes they'll say no. And I know Peter Drury was in the same position. Yeah. He ended up calling a Premier League game last year for BT. But the Premier League gig is good because there's a lot of it. I mean, I think I did nearly 70 games for them last season, which is basically 2 every round of the league. And it's nice because it gives you a really good handle on what's going on in the league. And if you would, if you're Martin Tyler at Sky, I can't assess totally accurately his lineup of games, but he perhaps does 40, 45 games for Sky. Obviously, he does a lot for others. So, we're doing nearly twice that. So we really do get around the league.
So what about the International Champions Cup? What do you see the potential of this tournament being, not just for this year, but also for future years too?
Well, first thing to say is I believe this has been the best one so far. It's year 5. I think it's benefited enormously from not being in the year of a major tournament. Because all the big names are here, and as we sit here, we're waiting on tenterhooks to see if Cristiano Ronaldo gets off a private jet in the next few hours. But Ronaldo notwithstanding, the quality of the games, there's been more of an edge to them. Yep. The quality of the starting lineups has been better. And I think it's now become an integral part of the warm-up process for the leading European sides. I mean, what's not to like about being in this climate with these facilities? I mean, Mourinho, I saw the other day, was waxing lyrical about UCLA and the preparatory regime that's been provided for Manchester United there. So I can only see this growing from strength to strength. I I just think that in a World Cup year, which we face next year, it's going to be more difficult to get the leading players because they are going to need a rest of some description.
Right.
I don't know how some of them function. People like Alexis Sanchez, who's sort of had Copa America Centenario, then he's had a Premier League season, and then he's had other commitments, Confederations Cup, and barely gets a rest before he goes to play who knows where. It's looking like it may be Arsenal again for the time being.
Sure.
But I think we do demand too much of these players. You know, there is a danger that the well runs dry in terms of their energy and enthusiasm. But I think the balance has been right at the ICC this time. And, hats off to Stephen Ross and Charlie Stilitano for what they managed to put together here. And I think it's also really good. I know it's not directly related to MLS and the growth of the domestic product, but it just means more eyeballs on the sport in the US, and that can only be good. And I noticed that MLS audiences recently, I know the juggernaut of the NFL hasn't come along yet to sort of crush everything in its path, but they've been a notch up, so there are seeds of encouragement there, and I think that the presence of great players in the US at a time when MLS is also on can only be good.
During the course of a long Premier League season, long English football season, do you feel the same way as the players? You get to a certain point in the season and you're going through the motions, or how do you keep it fresh from week to week? And does the international break help recharge you?
Well, it doesn't really, because we tend to get recruited then to go and do international matches.
Right. You come here.
Well, in my case, I tend to come here, and if I don't come here, then IMG have the rights to broadcast those games around the world, and they need commentators. So there's always the opportunity to do that. And you find the same thing with the FA Cup. That when the FA Cup comes round, rounds 3, 4 and 5, there's no Premier League, but there are then invitations to go and commentate on those games, either for BT or for the organisation that has the worldwide rights. And I think as a freelance, it's when do you say no? This is the constant battle in one's head. And my wife is pressing me hard. She wants to go and visit a close friend of hers who's moving to South Africa the first weekend in January, which of course is the third round of the FA Cup. So I've yet to negotiate that political minefield when I get home as to what we're going to do.
We're putting her on notice now.
Yeah, pretty much. Yes.
Now, Kartik, where can listeners find you on the internet?
You can find me at KKFLA737 on Twitter, Facebook at Kartik Krishnaiyer. You can send me a friend request, Google Plus, same thing at my name, and all over the web, writing, including in World Soccer Talk.
Okay, thanks for listening. You can get a new episode of the World Soccer Talk podcast every Thursday. Every episode is released on SoundCloud, YouTube, Stitcher, iTunes, Audio Boom, and worldsoccertalk.com. If you like the show, share it with your friends on social media and give us a review. And Kartik, what should they do?
Enjoy your football.